She was a feisty young mother rising above her past and living out her truth.
She was a very independent, strong-willed woman.
She was in a common law marriage, and it was a beautiful thing for them.
But in the midst of holiday festivities, she suddenly goes missing.
The calls started going straight to voicemail.
I can't find her. I don't know where else to look.
Did she run off to start a new life?
The spark fizzled out, and Jackie decided she needed more.
He said that she had left and gone to a modeling gig in Miami.
Or will investigators find her closer to home?
Can I just need you to son, breathe. You gotta control your breathing.
Her body is right under their noses the entire time.
As detectives uncover the secrets of the past, a dark truth comes to light.
I thought we were something special, something to be together forever, but she would leave me.
He tries to say she would just go in and out of his life, that she had a bunch of men in her life.
He would demand to be treated as a god, to be called the Messiah.
He said he was the Antichrist a couple times and his mom was the devil. It was freaky.
And when a second woman vanishes, the fight for answers reaches an all-time high.
Said that she was pulled out with the guy that she's known only 2 months.
They need to get ahead of this thing fast or risk finding another body.
It's a living nightmare for them.
January 1st, 2018. It's New Year's Day in Dallas, Texas, and the city's residents are winding down after a night of excitement.
New Year's for Dallas, you can pretty much find any type of party or social gathering.
But like most major cities, Dallas gets very busy around the New Year's. Families get together, going from home to home, party to party.
They're celebrating life. They're celebrating a new year, new beginnings. Things are changing and shifting.
But for one local mother, her life has taken a turn in the new year that she never could have expected.
It's been over a week, and she hasn't heard from her daughter, Jacqueline Hughes, who's 34 years old.
Come on, pick up.
Jackie dropped her own 2 daughters off on the 22nd and was supposed to return for Christmas.
Instead, Jackie's mother had received a single text message.
The last time that she had heard from her daughter was on Christmas Day, when she texted her to say Merry Christmas.
After that, she doesn't hear anything else from Jackie.
Jackie's mother is experiencing just extreme panic and worry.
Jackie, you're really freaking me out. Please, call me back. The girls miss you.
Jackie was considered a strong mom. She never abandoned her kids.
There's that cold spine tingling feeling where you know something is wrong.
Jackie Hughes refused to let her past define her.
Growing up on the south side of Dallas, she got into a lot of trouble.
Jackie was feisty. She was not gonna allow anyone to tell her what to do.
She started getting in trouble in middle school, and that kind of went into fighting, just getting into some heated arguments in high school, which ultimately landed her in juvie.
As a young adult, she also got into some trouble.
But since becoming a single mom in her late 20s, Jackie had worked hard to stay on the straight and narrow.
Jackie was a very independent, strong-willed woman.
She was taking classes at a local trade school for a better future for her and her girls.
And it was there she met someone who seemed like the perfect partner, 37-year-old Stella Andrews.
Hey. Hey. Great job on your presentation in class earlier. I wish I was good at public speaking.
Oh.
It would be a bit terrifying.
I guess there's not much that really scares me.
There was an instant connection and attraction between them.
So it wasn't long before they became a couple.
They consider themselves in a marriage type of relationship. She was also like a mom figure to the kids.
They were living their truth. They were living the life that they wanted for themselves, and it was a beautiful thing for them.
However, after almost a decade together, Jackie became restless.
After a long 9 years, their relationship began to fade.
The spark fizzled out, and Jackie decided she needed more.
So she turned to the World Wide Web.
She meets someone new online and connects with 31-year-old Brandon Sampson.
Brandon actually came from a really good family. His father was a local tax accountant. His mother was a PhD doctorate professor at a local college.
He's handsome, he's smart, he's funny. And they like the same type of music.
They didn't waste any time arranging to meet in person.
Yeah, so this is it. This is where I do my thing, make my music.
Oh, this is so cool, though.
Brandon went to school for media technology and hopes of becoming a music producer. He even had a music studio in his house on the south side of Dallas.
Can you show me how this works?
Of course, yeah. Come right here.
Jackie was really intrigued by Brandon's career in the music industry. That's not something she was familiar with, so that was really alluring to her.
While Jackie was excited about Brandon, she kept their budding relationship under wraps.
Stella was really in the dark about all this. Jackie didn't tell her about Brandon.
I think Jackie kept it from her, to protect her feelings.
But not long after meeting Brandon in person, their relationship hit the fast track.
It started out very hot and heavy from the very beginning. Their relationship moved very quickly.
Jackie and her daughters moved in with Brandon within weeks of the meeting.
The kids.
It's fine. They're heavy sleepers.
Jackie is really head over heels for Brandon, and they have this chemistry that is addictive. It's like a drug for her.
But as of January 1st, it's been more than a week since any of Jackie's friends or family have spoken to the young mother.
Jackie, I'm really freaking out. Please, give me a call back.
Instead of enjoying the holidays with her family, Jackie has disappeared.
And Jackie's mother can't contain her fears any longer.
By this time, the mom said, I need to go to the police station.
She rounds up Jackie's two daughters, and they head to Dallas PD.
Tell me the deal with your daughter. I can't find her. I don't know where else to look.
After a 9-year relationship with her girlfriend, Stella Andrews, fizzled out, Jackie Hughes found a new flame in 31-year-old aspiring music producer, Brandon Sampson.
He could show her things that she had never seen before, maybe take her places she had never been before. So this was exciting for Jacqueline.
Within weeks, Jackie and her daughters had moved into Brandon's house.
But by New Year's Day 2018, Jackie's loved ones haven't heard from her in a full week.
On January the 1st, Ms. Hughes made officers aware that she's been trying to get in touch with her daughter.
So tell me the deal with your daughter.
We've been out looking for her. We've been going to the places, talking to the people, and they haven't heard from her either.
Miss Hughes tells officers how Jackie never returned to pick up her kids after dropping them off on the 22nd.
She also tells him about the suspicious text she received from Jackie on Christmas Day.
She texted on Christmas Day and said, Mama, will you tell the kids I said Merry Christmas?
Miss Hughes texts Jackie back asking when she's coming over, but there's no response, so she tried calling.
So I called back. I didn't get no answer.
Okay.
I kept calling and kept calling. I wouldn't get no answer. Then next thing you know, the phone started going to the voicemail.
Jackie's mother says as several more days passed without any word from Jackie, she and her family tried everything they could to locate their missing loved one.
She reaches out to Jackie's former girlfriend, Stella Andrews, but Stella does not know where she is.
Jackie, I'm begging you, please, call me back.
We called the jail, we called the hospitals. So I said, well, my next stop is I got to go make a missing person report because I can't find her. I don't know where else to look.
But since Jackie is a healthy adult, there's only so much police can do.
Police file a report, but it's not your typical missing persons report.
It was just wanted to locate report due to the age of Jackie, and it'll make her aware that her family is looking for her.
It's pretty much, hey, your family's looking for you. You need to give them a call.
Officers also offer to execute a welfare check at Jackie's last known address.
Where was the last place y'all know she was staying at?
Miss Hughes tells the officer that Jackie had recently moved in with a new man that she started dating, but she doesn't know his name.
And she was saying, one of the girls that told us that they were staying over in Cedar Hill.
Miss Hughes says, in fact, she'd tried searching for Jackie there herself.
They didn't answer the door. When I went over there, they didn't answer the door.
Okay.
When officers head to the residence, they're also out of luck.
They knocked on the door, but nobody answered, so at that point, they really couldn't do anything. Their hands were tied.
However, they do learn the owner of the home is a man named Brandon Sampson. So they assume this must be the man Jackie has been dating.
After receiving no response at the residence, the police officers leave their business card on the front door with a note directing Brandon to reach out to them once he returns home.
Police also follow up with Jackie's former flame, Stella Andrews.
Okay, you and Jackie, you consider yourself common law married to her?
Yeah, you can say that.
Y'all been together for 9 years?
Yes.
She confirms they separated recently, but says they remain close.
We were we separated for a minute, but we're
still seeing each other?
Yeah.
Stella didn't even know Jackie had started dating someone new.
Had you ever known her to go to this house?
I didn't even know she was going. I didn't even know she was...
Do you know this guy, Brandon?
No, she was hiding it from me. And I kept asking her because I was like, something was right because you know your spouse.
Stella said the last time she verbally spoke with Jackie was around December 21st.
And everything seemed to be fine then?
Yes.
Did she tell you where she was?
No.
Stella assures detectives she'll let them know if she hears anything from her missing loved one.
I need you to keep your ears open, and if somebody knows something, we need to get their ass up in here, point blank.
I'm on it.
3 more days pass without any sign of Jackie.
Jackie's family is extremely concerned for her. They've put out flyers, they put out notices, they're talking about on Facebook if anybody's seen her. It's a living nightmare for them.
But on the evening of January 4th, police dispatch receives a shocking phone call that will send this missing persons case spiraling in an entirely new direction.
911, what's your emergency?
Yes, I need somebody here as soon as possible.
The caller is begging for help.
Can I see the somebody got shot?
And she seems to be comforting someone else in the background.
Breathe, breathe. You gotta control your breathing.
Three days after filing a want-to-locate report for missing mother Jackie Hughes, Dallas police have received an alarming 911 call.
I need somebody here as soon as possible.
The caller is begging for help, and she seems to be comforting someone else in the background.
Breathe. You gotta control your breathing.
The caller identifies herself as 21-year-old Monica Ellis, and she says her friend has been shot.
Yes, somebody got shot. I need an ambulance here ASAP.
Where are you?
The address is one police are already familiar with.
It's the same location of Jackie Hughes' last known address, the home of her boyfriend, Brandon Sampson.
Ma'am, they're driving to you, okay?
Okay.
Once on scene, EMTs tend to the shooting victim, a friend of Brandon's named Derek Knox.
Brandon and Monica are unharmed, but Derek has been shot twice in the leg.
Fortunately, he's expected to make a full recovery.
As paramedics transfer Derek to the hospital for treatment, officers stay behind to take a statement from Brandon and Monica.
Brandon, are you aware we were here a few days ago regarding the disappearance of Jackie Hughes?
What? No.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk to you about. But first, let's talk about this evening. What happened?
Brandon says it all started around 7 p.m.
He says he was at his house with a couple of friends just sitting around. And all of a sudden, there's banging on the door.
Hey, where is she? Where's Jackie? Where's my sister?
Brandon says it was Jackie's brother and another man he didn't recognize.
I can see y'all in there.
Come with me, come with me.
What you got going on, man?
It's nothing, man. Just go lock the front door for me.
Brandon runs to the back. The friend runs to the door to try to latch it and ends up getting sprayed with bullets.
Brandon's friend got shot through the door, and the shooters fled the scene.
Brandon says he and Monica immediately rushed to Derek's aid and tried to stop the bleeding.
Which is when Monica calls 911.
So I need somebody here like soon as possible.
That sound like an accurate depiction of events to you, Monica?
Yeah. I didn't get a good look at the shooter, but that's what happened.
And you're sure Jackie's brother did this?
Yes, sir. He's been here multiple times, looking for his sister, harassing me.
Do you know where she is?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was trying to tell him before he came over here the first time, but he wouldn't believe me.
Brandon said Jackie went to Miami for a modeling gig and to start a new life.
He says he drove her to the airport on the 25th, and he hasn't heard from her since.
I was pretty bummed about it, to be honest, but I guess she's just following her dreams, so.
He says he figured their relationship had run its course and it was time to move on.
To police, Brandon's story about Jackie's disappearance is somewhat suspicious.
Why would Jackie leave her family without so much as a goodbye?
But now they have a second crime to investigate.
They needed to figure out who shot Derek. Was Jackie's brother really the one responsible?
After Derek is released from the hospital, investigators meet up with him to take a statement.
Derek is still in a lot of pain from his injuries.
Thanks for waiting. How we doing?
Terrible.
Terrible.
Yes.
Pretty quickly, Derek confirms Brandon's account and says Jackie's brother is the one who shot him.
How do you know it was the brother?
Because he reached out to me while I was in the hospital.
He reached out to you? What did he say?
He was trying to be apologetic and saying that he didn't mean to hurt me. He was really trying to go for Brandon.
Derek is also able to pick Jackie's brother out of a lineup as the one who shot him.
That's pretty damning evidence.
After wrapping up their conversation with Derek, investigators immediately bring Jackie's brother in for questioning.
All right, so man, like I said, appreciate you coming down here. We're trying to get down to the bottom of this because, everything is fresh for us, okay? So.
He admits he has been to Brandon's house multiple times looking for his sister.
I had been over damn near each day. I'm knocking on the door like I'm the police. I'm trying to find her, you know what I mean? Yeah. Because I can't keep taking my mama crying, you know what I'm saying? I can't do it.
Can I help you, man?
Where's my sister?
You mean Jackie? She went to Miami, man. I haven't seen her since, like, Christmas Day.
Jackie's brother says immediately that he knew Brandon's story about Jackie flying to Miami for a modeling gig was BS.
I'm like, hell no. Yeah. I'm scared of heights. She's scared of heights. Nobody finna do no flying. And she ain't gonna get at me before she go anywhere.
Yeah.
First of all, Jackie is deadly afraid of flying. She wouldn't even get on a plane, and Jackie had never had a modeling career. That was nothing she had ever discussed with anyone.
Come on, man. Ain't no way.
You expect me to believe that?
It's not about what I expect you to believe, bro. I'm telling you the truth.
So he was like, oh, well, maybe she misled me. I said, oh, no. You can quit lying right now, man. It ain't gonna fly. So I tell him, I'll be in touch. You know what I mean? You gonna see a lot of me from her until I find my sister.
Despite his suspicions of Brandon, Jackie's brother says he didn't have anything to do with the shooting that took place at Brandon's home.
Were you over on that street that night?
No, I went over on that street.
Regardless, police have no choice but to place him under arrest.
You got picked out of the lineup. We have a warrant for your arrest for the shooting, okay? They're gonna take you down to jail, you get bonded out, and we're gonna sort all this out, okay? Unfortunately, that's what we got when we got a witness that picked you out.
Following the arrest of Jackie's brother, investigators looked deeper into Brandon Sampson's claim that Jackie flew to Miami.
Really? So they first called the airline to see if there was a ticket for Jackie out to Miami at any time that day.
There was no record of a Jacqueline Hughes purchasing a flight to Miami or anywhere else for that matter.
Did Jackie lie about where she was going, or did Brandon?
Someone isn't telling the truth here.
And on January 8th, Jackie's mother makes another discovery that will turn the case on its head.
She sees social media posts from Brandon from that same day.
In these posts, Brandon is implying that he has murdered Jackie Hughes.
Two weeks after Jackie Hughes was last seen, investigators are beginning to suspect her boyfriend, Brandon Sampson, could be involved in her disappearance.
Brandon gave the story that she had left and gone to a modeling gig in Miami.
But investigators can't find any evidence to support Brandon's account.
There is no history of Jacqueline Hughes purchasing a ticket to Miami or anywhere else for that matter.
Jackie's family is convinced that Brandon is lying.
And on January 8th, Jackie's mother makes an alarming discovery that fuels their suspicions.
She sees social media posts from Brandon from that same day. And the most concerning post of all is one that says, "She's gone. Stop looking for her. I'm gone too."
In these posts, Brandon is implying that he has murdered Jackie Hughes and that maybe Brandon is attempting to flee as well.
Homicide.
Jackie's mother immediately alerts detectives to Brandon's cryptic Facebook post.
That's when they start, okay, he could have more involvement than what we think. And they end up upgrading it to a critical missing.
And detectives confirm that now Jackie isn't the only one missing.
Brandon is nowhere to be found. He is not at home, and he is not answering his phone.
So police issue a BOLO that alerts any law enforcement agency to be on the lookout for an individual fitting Brandon's description.
For their next step in the investigation, police start tracking down Brandon's friends and family.
Some of their most eye-opening interviews are with Brandon's ex-girlfriends.
They found that Brandon has a history of violence against women.
Very soon after we started dating, it started to get abusive. He's standing over me with a knife. He was grabbing me and he was choking me.
Did you ever make any police reports on him?
No, called the cops once, but I didn't file a report.
His past girlfriends didn't want to prosecute. There was a lot of unreported abuse.
Thank you for allowing me to talk to you, and have a good night.
Brandon was a very dangerous manipulator. He would love bomb them, offer them unconditional love, support, and then he would withdraw that.
And his desire for control didn't stop there.
He would demand to be treated as a god, to be called the Messiah.
Did he reference himself as like a god when it came down to women?
He would talk about like he gonna have like 7 wives and all that stuff, and he gonna have his kids, like he gonna have everybody live in one house, you know, that type of crazy stuff.
With all the new information the police have gotten, they feel confident that they have enough to bring to the judge for a search warrant for Brandon's house.
On January 9th, police descend upon the home of Brandon Sampson. And while most of the house appears normal, the garage is anything but.
Upon entering the garage, the police are immediately hit with a strong odor.
It's that distinct smell that most law enforcement know is that of a dead body.
They move items out of the garage, and the more items they move, the stronger the smell becomes, until they see something wrapped in a blue blanket.
That's when police make the grisly discovery they've been dreading.
Dreadlocks was hanging outside the blanket.
This is the body of Jacqueline Hughes.
After executing a search warrant on Brandon Sampson's home, Dallas investigators have made a dreadful discovery in the garage: the body of Brandon's missing girlfriend, Jackie Hughes.
After they unwrap the blanket around her, they find she's partially decomposed.
Investigators believe it's likely Jackie has been in Brandon's garage since Christmas Day.
It's crazy to think that when the police responded to the house after the shooting on January 4th, Jackie's body was under their noses the entire time.
Now investigators are able to begin piecing together the events that led to Jackie's death.
It was 30 below in temperature, so that offset decomp.
It actually aided the investigation because the detectives were able to obtain more information from her body.
Investigators noticed clear signs of blunt force trauma, particularly to Jackie's head.
It was enough that it bruised, so that tells us that she was still alive when that injury was sustained, so it wasn't post-mortem.
But the brutal beating wasn't what ultimately took Jackie's life.
Her actual cause of death was a gunshot wound to the chest.
Jackie was shot 2 times, once in her lung, the other one in her aorta, and she bled out from seconds to minutes.
When the projectiles were recovered from Jackie's body, they were determined to be .22 caliber bullets.
Now that they are armed with proof that Jackie was murdered, they file an arrest warrant for Brandon.
Dispatch, let's update that bolo to wanted for murder.
Dallas police are now putting even more resources into tracking Brandon down.
But when detectives get their hands on Brandon's phone records, it's clear he's fled out of state.
I was able to map his phone and saw that he left the day after the shooting incident and started heading towards California.
However, the trail goes cold in San Bernardino.
It seems as though when he made it to San Bernardino, he either turned off his phone or got rid of it. There's been no activity on his phone since January 11th.
Days go by with no new leads, but on January 19th, detectives receive a surprising phone call.
Detective Cheney.
The woman's name is Janice Hansen, and the reason for her call is nothing they could have expected.
Janice said that she was referred to them after she contacted the Dallas police to report her 21-year-old daughter, Monica Ellis, missing.
It's the same Monica Ellis that was at Brandon's house the night of the shooting.
The last time I talked to her was on January 3rd, when she came to the house and said that she was moving out with the guy that she's known only 2 months.
She learned that Brandon was wanted for murder, and she tried to contact her daughter, but couldn't get a hold of her.
But I never would expect this, that she'd go and meet someone that's done something like this. And I don't know where she is. She hasn't talked to me. She hasn't called or texted.
Now, Janice is terrified that her daughter Monica has become another victim of Brandon's.
Knowing what Brandon is capable of, detectives share Janice's concerns.
Police knew they needed to get ahead of this thing, and fast, or risk finding another dead body.
They immediately start looking for Monica and pull her phone records, but just like Brandon's phone, they found that it has been deactivated.
2 more weeks pass with no leads on Brandon's or Monica's whereabouts. But on February 3rd, investigators receive another promising tip.
It's from a woman living in San Bernardino, California, which is the last place Brandon's phone pinged.
She told me, I got a guy that you are looking for a murder stand with my father.
Finally, investigators have the lead they've been praying for.
In February of 2018, Dallas investigators finally have a promising lead on the whereabouts of 31-year-old fugitive Brandon Sampson.
Brandon is wanted for the murder of his former girlfriend, Jackie Hughes, and is implicated in the disappearance of his current girlfriend, Monica Ellis.
Investigators' new lead comes from a woman over 1,000 miles away in San Bernardino, California.
She told me, I got a guy that you are looking for a murder stand with my father.
In tandem with Dallas police, California investigators swiftly descend on the home.
They just happened to catch him when he was out in the lawn drinking his coffee.
Brandon Sampson, you're under arrest.
Man, I didn't do nothing, man.
Worried that Brandon might have done the same to Monica as he did to Jackie, officers demand to know where she is.
Where's Monica Ellis?
She's inside.
Was Monica another victim of Brandon's at this point?
Brandon, what's going on?
Let me see your hands.
They discovered that Monica is not hurt, that she is safe.
Officers are relieved that Monica is unharmed. And as they clear the home, they come across a piece of evidence that further implicates Brandon in Jackie's murder.
They found a .22 caliber firearm underneath the bed that Brandon was sleeping on.
This was the same type of weapon that was used to kill Jackie Hughes.
After Brandon is extradited back to Texas, Dallas investigators are eager to sit down with him.
I'm gonna get to this straight. We did find Jackie, and she is deceased. And so Jackie was found at your residence.
No way.
Yes. Do you have any clue about that?
No, I didn't know she was found at my residence, anything like that.
Brandon insists that he's innocent. He had nothing to do with this.
Really, he starts with victim blaming, is what we call it. Jackie was the problem. Jackie was the one playing with my emotions, and Jackie left me.
Me and Jackie's relationship was a confusing relationship because I thought we were something special, something to be together forever. And she thought the same thing in my eye, but she would leave me.
He tries to say she would just go in and out of his life, that she had a bunch of men in her life.
He also denies making the social media post that would link him to Jackie's murder.
You never posted anything on Facebook?
Hell no, I never posted
You sure?
on Facebook. I'm 100%. I hadn't had a Facebook or touched
You have quite a few
Facebook
pages.
I haven't had a Facebook or touched a Facebook or anything like that since before Christmas.
He denies that he knows anything. So the detectives try several different ways to confront Brandon with evidence that they have been gathering.
You know, there's some projectiles that was found inside Jackie's body. Would that projectiles be shot from that gun that you was caught with?
No, it shouldn't be at all.
It shouldn't. And you should say yes or no. You
what
should
I'm
know.
saying is no, because I never shot that gun before.
He never really admits to anything in terms of shooting that firearm.
You could tell he was lying.
And you're not telling me the truth, bro.
I'm telling you the truth, sir.
You have nothing to do with Jackie's death.
Nothing to do with Jackie.
But investigators are confident they're looking at Jackie's killer.
He knew Jackie was dead. He knew Jackie was in that garage. And so any version that he may give now that he had nothing to do with her death is out the window.
At the end of the interview, they charge him with murder.
He was charged with first-degree murder, which carries a punishment range of 5 years in the penitentiary up to life in prison.
As investigators prepare for trial, they sit down with Brandon's new girlfriend, Monica Ellis.
She seems like she can be a really strong witness for them in court if she's willing to be forthcoming about her relationship with Brandon.
There's some questions I have to ask you. Hopefully you'll be truthful.
Yeah.
Okay, I just kind of want to lay the grounds of when did you meet Brandon?
I was talking to him on tag.
Monica met Brandon online around the same time he was talking to Jackie.
He completely enchanted her very, very quickly, and the same pattern started all over again.
But it wasn't long before Monica started to see Brandon's true colors.
Yeah, because it was weird because he was starting to threaten me and he was like, oh, you ready to die? You want death to come upon you? I'm like, no, I don't want death.
When did he start doing that?
That third week before y'all filmed me, really.
Did he have a reference to you as he was a god?
Yeah, it's like he's a Messiah. He said he was the Antichrist a couple times and his mom was the devil. And, you know, it was freaky.
What really started to get scary for her was when that shooting happened. She knew something was up when they were going to California, but she was too scared to really try to leave. She didn't know what was going on.
When did you find out when he was on? When we took him in the concert?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's when I found out she was in that garage and everything. I did not know that.
They believe her story that she knew nothing about him having murdered Jackie.
To investigators, it's clear Monica Ellis is just another one of Brandon's many victims.
With Monica's statement in tow, investigators feel even more prepared to face Brandon Sampson in court.
And on July 30th, 2019, Brandon's trial begins.
Jackie had a feisty personality, and that conflicted with Brandon's God complex. And the prosecutors set the stage for demonstrating that these two dynamic personalities boiled over on Christmas Day.
You ain't no God. You just a cat with a big mouth.
You can't speak to me that way.
I speak to you however I want to. You don't own me.
And I think really that's when the violence came out in Brandon Sampson against Jackie.
But Jackie was a fighter, and she wasn't going down easy.
Leave me alone, you psycho!
That is when he escalated and got the gun to shoot her.
You're gonna regret.
His God complex allowed him to believe that he was bulletproof and no one was ever going to find out about what he did. So after he killed her, Brandon piled some things on top of her and ultimately tried to forget about her.
It is possible that he sent the Merry Christmas text to Jackie's mother to make her think that she was still alive, but investigators are unable to confirm that.
When the jury retires to deliberate, prosecutors hope the jury will see through Brandon's facade.
It wasn't a quick verdict. Obviously, they had a lot of evidence to consider.
But after the jury comes back with their verdict, they come to the conclusion that Brandon would be charged with first-degree murder.
He's sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years.
She had a huge family showing at her trial, and when the sentence came out that they found him guilty, it was one of the greatest celebrations.
And Jackie's brother was there celebrating alongside the rest of her loved ones.
The charges against him for the shooting at Brandon's house were dropped, and they never officially confirmed who shot Derek.
To this day, Jackie's case continues to impact those who fought hard to see justice served.
For me now, I have a different way of looking at missing persons. Don't just write it off as, hey, they just probably don't want to be bothered. Actually, put some time into it, because that missing person can easily be a Jacqueline.
She was just a good mom, a good sister, and a good daughter that did her best, but unfortunately, she crossed paths with an individual that ultimately took her life in a horrific way.
On the morning of December 14th, still 1988, what should have been another ordinary school day in Federal Way, Washington, instead, became the beginning of one of the region's most enduring murder investigations. Students were expected to arrive at school, teachers prepared for the day's lessons, and parents carried on with routines that had repeated themselves countless times before. But before classes could truly begin, a shocking discovery shattered that sense of normality. A teenage girl lay dead near the entrance to her high school. Within hours, police vehicles surrounded the campus, yellow crime scene tape stretched across familiar walkways, and a community that had always regarded its schools as places of safety was forced to confront an unimaginable reality. The victim was identified as 16-year-old Sarah Yarborough, a student whose life had ended only moments before it was meant to continue like any other Wednesday morning. Federal Way in 1988 was a rapidly growing suburban community located between Seattle and Tacoma. Families were drawn there by quiet neighborhoods, expanding schools, and the promise of a stable environment in which to raise children. Residents knew one another through school events, youth sports, churches, and local businesses. Violent crime certainly existed, as it did in any growing city, but the murder of a teenager on school grounds was almost beyond comprehension. News of the discovery spread with astonishing speed. Parents received frantic phone calls. Students whispered to one another in hallways before many even understood what had happened. Teachers struggled to maintain order while trying to process the tragedy unfolding just outside the classrooms. By midday, television news crews had arrived, broadcasting images of police officers moving carefully through the secured area while investigators searched for every possible clue. Sarah Yarborough had left home that morning expecting nothing more extraordinary than another day at school. Publicly available accounts describe her as a responsible teenager who arrived early because she participated in school activities before classes began. Those routines were familiar to her family and classmates, making her arrival at the campus entirely predictable. Investigators would later conclude that this predictability may have been significant. Whoever attacked Sarah appeared to know that students would begin arriving early, yet the assault occurred before the campus became crowded enough for immediate intervention. The timeline suggested a narrow window of opportunity, measured in only a few minutes, during which the killer acted before disappearing. Emergency responders arrived quickly after Sarah was found, but it became immediately apparent that there was nothing they could do. Detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office began treating the area as a homicide scene. Every footprint, every discarded object, every disturbance in the ground demanded careful attention. Crime scene photographers documented the location from multiple angles before anything was moved. Evidence technicians worked methodically despite freezing December temperatures, understanding that mistakes made during those first hours could never be corrected later. Their responsibility was immense. They did not know whether the killer had left behind fingerprints, fibers, biological evidence, or other traces that might one day identify the person responsible. As investigators expanded the perimeter, students were redirected away from the area. Many had never before seen a homicide investigation unfold. Patrol cars, detectives in heavy winter jackets, forensic specialists carrying equipment cases, and television cameras transformed the familiar school entrance into a scene associated more with crime dramas than everyday life. Rumors spread almost immediately. Some believed a stranger had attacked Sarah while she walked to school. Others feared someone connected to the campus might be responsible. At that early stage, investigators publicly avoided drawing conclusions. They focused instead on preserving evidence and interviewing everyone who might have seen something unusual during the critical morning hours. The first interviews began almost immediately. Students who had arrived early were asked about unfamiliar vehicles, suspicious individuals, unusual sounds, or anything that appeared out of place. School employees retraced their own movements, attempting to establish a precise timeline. Drivers passing nearby were contacted whenever possible. Detectives understood that memories are most reliable immediately after an event, before conversations with others unintentionally alter recollections. Even details that seemed insignificant, a person standing alone, a vehicle parked briefly along a road, someone walking quickly away from campus could eventually become important pieces of a much larger puzzle. As news reached Sarah's family, their lives changed forever. Instead of welcoming their daughter home after school, they were confronted with devastating confirmation that she had become the victim of a violent crime. For investigators, family members often provide essential background information about routines, friendships, schedules, and recent events. Detectives worked to understand Sarah's daily life while remaining sensitive to the unimaginable grief experienced by those closest to her. Public records indicate that investigators examined whether there had been any prior threats, conflicts, or circumstances suggesting Sarah had been specifically targeted. At the same time, they considered the possibility that the attack had been opportunistic. The physical evidence collected at the scene immediately became one of the investigation's greatest assets. Although forensic science in 1988 had not yet reached the capabilities available decades later, experienced investigators recognized the importance of preserving every item with meticulous care. Biological evidence was documented and stored according to the standards of the time. Detectives could not have known that future advances in DNA technology would dramatically expand what could eventually be learned from material recovered that December morning. Nevertheless, their careful preservation of evidence would prove crucial to the investigation's future. Law enforcement agencies faced enormous pressure almost immediately. A homicide involving a teenage victim on school property naturally generated widespread fear. Parents questioned whether schools remained safe. Students wondered whether the killer might return. Community meetings reflected growing anxiety as residents sought reassurance from officials. Detectives balanced the need to protect the integrity of the investigation with the public's demand for information. They released only limited details, hoping to avoid compromising witness statements or revealing facts known only to the perpetrator. Media coverage intensified throughout the following days. Newspapers across Washington reported on the shocking crime, emphasizing both Sarah's age and the location of the attack. Television broadcasts repeatedly showed images of the school entrance and interviews with concerned residents. While the attention helped generate leads, it also created additional challenges. Hundreds of tips began arriving. Some were based on direct observations. Others originated from speculation or rumor. Investigators were obligated to examine each credible lead carefully, knowing that even one overlooked detail could delay justice indefinitely.
Detectives reconstructed Sarah's final movements using witness interviews and available evidence. They established when she left home, when she was expected to arrive at school, and approximately when the attack occurred.
Every minute became significant. Investigators sought to determine whether anyone had interacted with Sarah shortly before she reached campus or whether any vehicles had followed her route that morning. Establishing this timeline became one of the investigation's central objectives because narrowing the window of opportunity also narrowed the number of potential witnesses. The murder fundamentally changed the atmosphere within Federal Way. What had once been ordinary routines, walking to school before sunrise during the winter months, arriving early for extracurricular activities, crossing nearly empty parking lots, suddenly carried an entirely different meaning. Parents began driving students who had previously walked alone. Schools reviewed security procedures. Community members became more attentive to unfamiliar people or vehicles near campuses. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate investigation, influencing daily life long after crime scene tape had been removed. Behind the scenes, detectives continued working long hours, reviewing reports, organizing evidence, and developing investigative strategies. Experienced homicide investigators understand that the earliest phase of an investigation often determines its long-term direction. Every interview was documented. Every photograph was cataloged. Every piece of physical evidence was preserved with extraordinary care. Although they could not yet identify the person responsible, investigators believed the answer existed somewhere within the evidence collected that winter morning. As daylight faded on December 14th, the school grounds gradually returned to silence, but nothing about the community felt normal anymore. The place where students had expected another ordinary day had instead become synonymous with tragedy. For Sarah Yarborough's family, classmates, teachers, and neighbors, time would now be measured not only by calendars, but by the unanswered questions left behind. Who had attacked a 16-year-old student just steps from her school? Why had she been targeted? And where had the killer gone in the minutes after committing a crime that would haunt Washington investigators for decades? Those questions remained unanswered as detectives preserved every fragment of evidence, determined that however long it took, the truth hidden within that December morning would one day have the opportunity to speak. On December 14th, SIL 1988, the first hours after Sarah Yarborough's body was discovered became a race against time. Every homicide investigation begins with a narrow window in which evidence is at its freshest. Witnesses remember events most clearly, and the smallest overlooked detail can determine whether a case is solved quickly or remains unsolved for years. Detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office understood this reality as they transformed the entrance to Federal Way High School into a meticulously controlled crime scene. Uniformed deputies secured every approach to the area while investigators documented the location exactly as it had been found. Nothing was moved without photographs. Every measurement was recorded. Every potential piece of evidence was treated as though it might eventually identify the person responsible. The timing of the attack immediately became one of the investigation's most important questions. Publicly available investigative records indicate that Sarah arrived at school before regular classes began, as she often did for school activities. Detectives worked to determine precisely when she reached campus and how much time had passed before she was discovered. By comparing witness accounts with school schedules and emergency response records, investigators narrowed the sequence of events to only a matter of minutes. That limited time frame suggested the offender had acted quickly and escaped before large numbers of students began arriving. It also meant that someone passing through the area during those critical moments might unknowingly have seen the killer. Crime scene technicians examined the ground surrounding the location with extraordinary care. December weather in western Washington often leaves surfaces damp, increasing the possibility that footwear impressions or tire tracks might survive long enough to be documented. Investigators searched for disturbances in vegetation, impressions in soil, discarded objects, fibers, and anything that appeared inconsistent with the normal surroundings of the school. Each item was photographed, measured, labeled, and collected according to forensic procedures available at the time. Detectives knew that physical evidence would remain objective long after memories faded. Among the most significant discoveries was biological evidence recovered during the forensic examination. In 1988, DNA profiling was still an emerging investigative tool in the United States. Although laboratories could already perform certain forms of DNA analysis, the technology was far less sensitive than it would become decades later. Investigators nevertheless recognized the importance of preserving every biological sample recovered from the scene. Those samples were carefully packaged,
documented, and placed into secure evidence storage.
No one involved in the investigation could fully anticipate that scientific advances many years later would dramatically increase the value of material collected that cold December morning. The medical examiner's examination helped establish critical facts about Sarah's death. Public records describe that investigators determined she had been murdered shortly after arriving at school. The examination provided detectives with information regarding the nature of the attack, the estimated time of death, and evidence that could assist in reconstructing the sequence of events. While authorities intentionally withheld certain details from public release, preserving information that only the perpetrator would know, the findings confirmed that detectives were investigating a deliberate homicide rather than an accidental death or another explanation. As forensic teams completed their work, homicide detectives expanded the investigation beyond the immediate crime scene. Roads leading toward the school became areas of interest. Officers attempted to identify motorists who had traveled through the neighborhood during the early morning hours. School employees, maintenance personnel, delivery drivers, and nearby residents were interviewed to determine whether anyone had noticed unfamiliar vehicles or suspicious individuals. Investigators recognized that crimes committed in public spaces often leave behind witnesses who never realized the importance of what they observed until much later. Students arriving after the discovery encountered an atmosphere unlike anything they had experienced before. Patrol vehicles lined nearby streets. Television cameras recorded live broadcasts from outside the campus. Reporters interviewed parents gathering beyond police barriers. Inside the school, administrators and counselors attempted to support frightened students while maintaining as much normalcy as possible. Many teenagers struggled to understand how violence of this magnitude could occur in a place that had always represented routine, friendship, and education. Fear spread rapidly throughout the community, fueled by uncertainty rather than confirmed facts. Detectives began constructing an increasingly detailed timeline of Sarah's final morning. They confirmed her departure from home, examined the route she would have traveled, and interviewed individuals who had interacted with her shortly before the attack. Every verified movement became another point on a chronological map designed to reveal exactly where opportunity existed for the killer. Investigators also explored whether anyone had been aware of Sarah's predictable schedule. Because she regularly arrived at school early, detectives considered whether the offender might have known her routine in advance or simply encountered her by chance. The possibility that the killer had fled on foot received careful attention. Investigators searched surrounding wooded areas, nearby streets, and adjacent properties for discarded clothing, weapons, or other items that might have been abandoned while escaping. Search teams moved systematically through areas surrounding the school, documenting anything that appeared unusual. Although no immediate breakthrough emerged, every search eliminated possibilities and refined the investigative picture. Telephone lines at the sheriff's office soon filled with tips from members of the public. Some callers reported suspicious vehicles seen near the school during previous days. Others described strangers observed in the neighborhood weeks before the murder. Detectives assigned investigators specifically to evaluate incoming information, separating potentially valuable leads from speculation and rumor. Every credible report required follow-up interviews, documentation, and comparison against known facts. Major investigations often generate hundreds or even thousands of tips, and investigators cannot afford to dismiss information prematurely. Media attention intensified as regional newspapers published front-page coverage, describing the shocking crime. Television broadcasts emphasized both Sarah's youth and the unusual location of the homicide. Public concern grew with each report. Parents questioned school officials about student safety. Community meetings focused on whether additional security measures were necessary. Investigators balanced public demands for answers with the need to protect sensitive details that could prove essential during future interviews or prosecutions. Within the investigative team, detectives explored every reasonable possibility regarding motive. They examined whether Sarah had experienced recent conflicts, whether she had been threatened, or whether someone might have specifically targeted her. The detectives also considered whether the murder could have been committed by someone with no prior connection to the victim. At that early stage, investigators deliberately avoided narrowing their focus too quickly. Experience taught them that premature assumptions can cause critical evidence to be overlooked. Witness interviews continued throughout the following days. Detectives often returned to the same individuals multiple times as memories became clearer or additional information emerged. Small discrepancies between accounts were carefully evaluated rather than immediately dismissed. Human memory is imperfect, particularly following traumatic events, but overlapping observations from independent witnesses can sometimes establish highly reliable timelines. Investigators compared every statement against physical evidence collected from the scene. Forensic laboratories began processing the evidence submitted by detectives. Fingerprints recovered from relevant items were compared against available records. Trace evidence underwent microscopic examination. Biological samples were preserved according to existing scientific standards. Although technological limitations prevented the comprehensive DNA analysis that would later become routine, investigators understood that preserving evidence for future testing represented one of their greatest responsibilities. Proper evidence storage would eventually become one of the defining strengths of the investigation. The emotional toll on Sarah's classmates remained profound. Vigils and memorials reflected a community struggling to process sudden violence. Teachers attempted to comfort students while confronting their own grief. Counselors met with teenagers frightened by the realization that danger could exist even in familiar surroundings. For many residents of Federal Way, the murder permanently altered perceptions of safety. Parents adjusted daily routines. Students became more cautious about traveling alone before sunrise. The impact extended well beyond the immediate tragedy itself. Behind closed doors, detectives worked late into the night reviewing interview transcripts, maps, photographs, and evidence inventories. Large investigative boards displayed timelines, witness locations, and known movements during the crucial morning hours. Every confirmed fact was carefully distinguished from speculation. Investigators repeatedly reconstructed the attack using available evidence, asking the same questions from different perspectives. How did the offender approach Sarah? Which direction did the killer leave? What had been overlooked during the first examination? Those questions drove every decision made during the investigation's earliest phase. Despite exhaustive efforts during those first days, no immediate suspect emerged. Detectives possessed evidence indicating that a violent crime had occurred, but identifying the individual responsible proved far more difficult. The absence of an arrest did not reflect a lack of effort. Rather, it illustrated the complexity of homicide investigations before modern forensic advances transformed criminal identification. Still, investigators refused to abandon hope. They believed the evidence collected on December 14th, SIL 1988, held answers that science simply could not yet fully reveal. As winter settled over Federal Way, the crime scene disappeared physically, but its presence remained deeply embedded in the community's memory. Students continued attending classes beneath the shadow of unanswered questions. Detectives continued following leads, comparing evidence, and searching for the breakthrough that refused to come. Unknown to everyone involved, the investigation had entered the beginning of a journey that would span more than 3 decades, sustained by careful evidence preservation, relentless detective work, and the belief that even the oldest homicide cases can one day yield their secrets when determination and scientific progress finally intersect. On December 14th, SIL 1988, as investigators completed the painstaking documentation of the crime scene at Federal Way High School, the investigation entered a new and equally demanding phase. The physical evidence had been collected, the immediate area had been searched, and dozens of initial interviews had been conducted. Now detectives faced the difficult task of transforming isolated pieces of information into a coherent reconstruction of Sarah Yarborough's final moments. Every report was reviewed repeatedly. Every witness statement was compared against the timeline. Every unanswered question became another avenue that required careful examination. Experience had taught homicide investigators that the first days following a murder often establish the foundation for everything that follows, and they approached the case with the understanding that even the smallest verified detail might eventually prove decisive. The reconstruction began with Sarah's normal routine. According to publicly documented information, she regularly arrived at school early because of extracurricular activities. That habit immediately attracted investigators' attention because routines create predictability. Detectives examined whether anyone outside Sarah's immediate circle could have known her schedule. They interviewed classmates, teachers, coaches, family members, and friends to understand how widely known her morning routine had been. They also considered a different possibility, that the timing was purely coincidental and the offender had selected the location rather than the victim. At that early stage, neither theory could be confirmed or excluded, so investigators pursued both with equal determination. The entrance to Federal Way High School became the focus of repeated examinations. Detectives walked the same routes Sarah was believed to have taken, observing visibility from nearby roads, parking areas, and buildings. They documented where lighting fixtures were positioned, how much natural light was present during the early December morning, and which areas might have been concealed from passing motorists or arriving students. The goal was not speculation, but practical reconstruction. Could someone wait unnoticed near the entrance? How long would an encounter remain hidden before another student appeared? How quickly could someone leave the area without attracting attention? These questions shaped every aspect of the investigation. Investigators also examined the broader neighborhood surrounding the school. Officers canvassed nearby homes, speaking with residents who might have been awake before sunrise. Delivery drivers, newspaper carriers, sanitation workers, and commuters became particularly important because they routinely traveled through the area during the exact time frame investigators sought to reconstruct. Detectives understood that ordinary daily routines sometimes place witnesses at the scene of extraordinary events. Even someone who noticed a vehicle parked briefly along a roadside or an unfamiliar person walking away from campus could unknowingly possess information of lasting significance. The interviews themselves followed a careful methodology. Detectives encouraged witnesses to describe events chronologically rather than asking only direct questions. This approach often reveals details that individuals do not initially recognize as important. Someone might remember hearing an unusual sound, noticing headlights in an unexpected location, or seeing a person wearing clothing that later becomes relevant. Investigators documented not only what witnesses remembered, but also the level of certainty associated with each observation. Distinguishing confirmed facts from uncertain recollections became essential as the investigation expanded. As evidence continued arriving from the forensic laboratory, detectives integrated scientific findings into their investigative strategy. Fingerprint comparisons, trace evidence examinations, and biological testing all proceeded according to the capabilities available in 1988. While DNA technology existed in limited form, it lacked the sensitivity and extensive databases that investigators would eventually have decades later. Nevertheless, forensic specialists emphasized preserving all biological material with exceptional care. Proper storage ensured that evidence could be re-examined if future scientific advances offered new possibilities. This decision, routine at the time, would later prove one of the investigation's greatest strengths. The murder generated intense media attention throughout Washington state. Newspapers published detailed coverage describing the discovery and the ongoing search for the killer. Television reporters broadcast daily updates from outside the school, often emphasizing the fear spreading throughout Federal Way. Detectives recognized that media coverage served both helpful and challenging purposes. Public attention encouraged witnesses to come forward, but it also increased speculation. Rumors circulated rapidly, identifying possible suspects without evidence or attributing motives unsupported by facts. Investigators therefore maintained a disciplined approach, releasing only information they believed would assist the investigation while withholding details that remained known only to law enforcement and the perpetrator. The emotional impact on students remained profound. Counselors continued meeting with teenagers struggling to understand how violence had entered a place associated with education and friendship. Many students had walked the same paths Sarah used every morning. Others had planned to see her in class later that day. The realization that a familiar routine had ended in tragedy deeply affected classmates and teachers alike. Community memorials reflected not only grief, but also determination that Sarah would not be forgotten. While investigators pursued evidence, the community sought ways to support one another through shared mourning. Inside the sheriff's office, detectives organized the growing volume of investigative material into structured case files. Maps displayed witness locations. Timelines marked verified movements minute by minute. Evidence logs documented every item collected from the crime scene. Investigators regularly met to review developments collectively, challenging assumptions and exploring alternative explanations. Experienced homicide teams understand the danger of becoming committed to a single theory too early. Each meeting encouraged detectives to reconsider the evidence from different perspectives, ensuring that no reasonable possibility remained unexplored. Attention also turned toward identifying individuals who had legitimate reasons to be near the school during the early morning hours. Maintenance workers, contractors, delivery personnel, parents dropping off students, and employees with early schedules were all interviewed where appropriate. Detectives sought to establish who should have been present and, equally important, whether anyone observed at the school could not be readily accounted for. Creating this distinction between expected and unexpected activity became an essential component of the investigation. As additional witness interviews were completed, investigators refined the estimated timeline surrounding the homicide. Although exact minute-by-minute certainty proved impossible, detectives gradually narrowed the likely period during which the attack occurred. This reconstruction suggested that the offender acted swiftly, completing the assault and leaving before the area became crowded. Such timing implied either familiarity with the morning routine at the school or remarkable coincidence. Determining which explanation was correct became one of the investigation's central challenges. The preservation of physical evidence remained a constant priority. Detectives carefully reviewed every item collected, ensuring that chain of custody documentation remained complete and accurate. They understood that homicide investigations sometimes continue for years, requiring evidence to withstand repeated examinations, laboratory testing, and eventual courtroom scrutiny. Even in 1988, experienced investigators appreciated that scientific capabilities were advancing rapidly. Evidence considered inconclusive today might become highly significant tomorrow. This philosophy guided every decision regarding storage, packaging, and documentation. Public concern continued growing as days passed without an arrest. Parents questioned whether the offender remained in the community. School officials evaluated security procedures, increasing awareness around campus and encouraging students not to travel alone during early morning hours. Although investigators emphasized that no verified evidence indicated an ongoing threat specifically directed towards students, uncertainty naturally fueled anxiety. The absence of immediate answers often proves more unsettling than confirmed information, particularly in cases involving young victims. Detectives also reviewed reports of suspicious incidents that had occurred before the murder. While many ultimately proved unrelated, each required careful evaluation. Patterns sometimes emerge only after investigators compare seemingly isolated events across weeks or months. Officers therefore examined previous complaints, unusual encounters reported near schools, and other incidents that might conceivably connect to the homicide. Most investigations eliminate far more possibilities than they confirm, but systematic elimination remains essential to establishing reliable conclusions. Behind every procedural decision remained the memory of a 16-year-old whose life had ended far too soon. Detectives frequently reminded themselves that evidence represented more than reports and photographs. Each document reflected an effort to answer questions that Sarah's family had every right to ask. Who committed this crime? Why had it happened? Could it have been prevented? Although investigators could not yet provide those answers, their responsibility was to preserve every opportunity for future justice. As the initial weeks of the investigation came to a close, one reality had become increasingly apparent. Despite extensive interviews, careful forensic work, and relentless investigative effort, no definitive suspect had been identified. Yet detectives did not regard the absence of an immediate arrest as failure. Many homicide investigations require persistence measured not in days but in years. The evidence collected on December 14th remained preserved. Witness statements remained documented. Every lead remained recorded for future review. Unknown to everyone involved, the scientific breakthroughs that would eventually transform the case still lay decades in the future. But because investigators had approached those first critical hours with patience, discipline, and attention to detail, they ensured that the possibility of future answers remained alive. The search for Sarah Yarborough's killer would continue, driven by the conviction that even if justice could not be achieved quickly, it should never cease to be pursued. On the afternoon of December 14th, SIL 1988, the scene outside Federal Way High School no longer resembled the place where hundreds of students had gathered only hours earlier. Patrol cars still lined the surrounding streets. Crime scene tape remained stretched across sections of the campus entrance. Detectives moved deliberately between evidence markers, while forensic specialists completed one final sweep before releasing portions of the area. What had begun as a routine winter morning had become the center of one of Washington State's most significant homicide investigations. Yet despite the intensity of the response, investigators were already confronting a troubling reality. The person responsible had vanished long before the first patrol units arrived. The investigation immediately focused on reconstructing the final minutes before Sarah Yarborough's death. Detectives knew that every homicide is governed by time. The difference between a witness who arrived at 7:15 a.m. and another who arrived at 7:20 a.m. could determine whether someone unknowingly passed the offender or missed the encounter entirely. Investigators collected attendance records, reviewed schedules for before-school activities, and interviewed faculty members responsible for opening classrooms and supervising early arrivals. They wanted to know exactly who entered the campus, from which direction they came, and whether anyone remembered seeing something unusual during those crucial moments before the school day officially began. Witnesses described an ordinary winter morning. Students hurried toward classrooms, some carrying books beneath heavy jackets against the cold December air. Teachers prepared lessons. Custodial staff completed routine duties before the campus became crowded. Nothing in those first moments suggested that a violent crime had just occurred nearby. Detectives recognized that this apparent normality actually emphasized how quickly the attack must have taken place. Publicly available investigative information indicates that Sarah arrived early, as she often did. Within only a short period, she had been fatally attacked. The offender had then disappeared before the area filled with students and staff. Investigators carefully mapped every possible route into and out of the campus. They examined sidewalks, parking lots, nearby roads, wooded sections, and surrounding neighborhoods. Each path represented a potential approach or escape route. Officers drove the same roads at the same time of day to observe traffic patterns. They noted visibility from intersections, locations where vehicles could briefly stop without attracting attention, and areas where someone on foot might move unnoticed. None of these observations identified a suspect, but together they helped detectives understand the environment in which the crime occurred. The crime scene itself continued to provide investigators with valuable physical evidence. Every item recovered underwent detailed documentation before being submitted for laboratory analysis. Fibers, hairs, fingerprints where available, footwear impressions, and biological evidence were all handled according to established forensic procedures. Detectives understood that evidence collected correctly during the first day would remain available for examination years later if necessary. Although DNA profiling existed in 1988, it was still limited compared with the technology that investigators would eventually possess decades afterward. Nevertheless, preserving biological material became one of the highest priorities because advances in science were already beginning to reshape criminal investigations across the United States. At the same time, detectives expanded their interview strategy. Rather than focusing only on people who had been physically present at the school that morning, they also spoke with friends, relatives, neighbors, coaches, teachers, and classmates who knew Sarah's daily routine. Public records show investigators examined every aspect of her recent activities, attempting to determine whether anyone had expressed unusual interest in her schedule or whether any incident, however minor, might have significance. Detectives resisted the temptation to draw early conclusions. Experience taught them that cases involving young victims often require investigators to eliminate many possibilities before identifying the correct one. As news spread beyond Federal Way, media organizations across Washington reported extensively on the homicide. Evening television broadcasts showed aerial footage of the school and interviewed concerned parents gathered outside police lines. Newspapers described the killing as both shocking and deeply unsettling because it had occurred at a location universally associated with learning and safety. Community members who had never met Sarah nevertheless felt personally affected. Parents began changing morning routines, driving children to school instead of allowing them to walk alone. School administrators reviewed security procedures, while students struggled to understand how such violence could occur in a place so familiar. Inside the Investigative Command Center, detectives established a structured system for evaluating information. Every incoming tip received a case number. Every witness statement was summarized and indexed. Investigators compared reports to identify recurring descriptions of vehicles, individuals, or unusual activity near the campus. Hundreds of pieces of information required careful review. Most ultimately proved unrelated, but detectives knew that significant investigations often depend upon recognizing connections hidden among seemingly ordinary observations. The reconstruction of Sarah's final movements became increasingly detailed. Investigators established when she left home, the route she was believed to have taken, and approximately when she arrived near the school. They then compared those verified facts with statements from individuals who had been in the vicinity. Even small differences in estimated times were analyzed because narrowing the window of opportunity also narrowed the number of people who could have encountered the offender. Detectives repeatedly revised their timeline as new information became available, ensuring that every conclusion rested upon confirmed evidence rather than assumption. The forensic examination continued behind the scenes. Specialists analyzed evidence using the best scientific methods available at the time. Certain tests produced useful investigative information, while others reached the limits of contemporary technology. Importantly, however, evidence that could not be fully interpreted was not discarded. It remained preserved under carefully controlled conditions. Investigators understood that science evolves. Material considered inconclusive in one decade might become decisive in another. That foresight would later become one of the defining strengths of the case. Meanwhile, Sarah's family faced the unimaginable task of grieving while investigators searched for answers. Detectives maintained regular communication with them, explaining investigative steps without revealing sensitive details that could compromise the case. Families of homicide victims often become essential partners in long-term investigations, providing information, preserving memories, and sustaining public awareness when cases remain unsolved. Although the investigation was only beginning, detectives recognized the importance of maintaining that relationship from the outset. As the first 24 hours came to an end, investigators gathered to review everything they had learned. They identified confirmed facts, unresolved questions, and investigative priorities for the days ahead. No single witness had identified the killer. No immediate arrest appeared imminent. Yet experienced detectives refused to interpret the absence of quick results as failure. The case contained substantial physical evidence, a carefully documented crime scene, and an increasingly refined timeline. They believed those elements would eventually reveal the truth, even if the process required patience measured not in days but in years. The murder of Sarah Yarborough had already transformed Federal Way. Students returned to classrooms overshadowed by fear. Parents looked more closely at their children's daily routines. Teachers attempted to restore a sense of normalcy despite knowing that nothing felt normal anymore. Beyond the visible grief lay another emotion that would remain for decades: uncertainty. Somewhere beyond the school grounds, the individual responsible continued living without having been identified. Detectives understood that solving the case would require persistence long after media attention faded. Every report, every photograph, every carefully preserved piece of evidence represented an investment in a future investigation that they hoped would one day deliver the answers that December 14th, SIL, 1988, had cruelly withheld. As the days following December 14th, SIL, 1988, turned into weeks, the investigation into Sarah Yarborough's murder entered a phase familiar to experienced homicide detectives, but invisible to the public. The flashing emergency lights disappeared from outside Federal Way High School. Television crews gradually packed away their cameras. Students attempted to resume classes, and parents tried to restore routines that had been shattered by violence. Yet inside the King County Sheriff's Office, the case was anything but quiet. Detectives continued working long after the headlines faded, convinced that somewhere within the growing collection of reports, forensic evidence, and witness interviews lay the answer to who had attacked a 16-year-old student just steps from her school. One of the investigators' first priorities was to eliminate uncertainty wherever possible. Every witness interview was reviewed multiple times. The detectives compared statements side by side, looking not only for contradictions, but also for details repeated independently by different people. A vehicle noticed by one witness might seem insignificant on its own, but if another person reported seeing a similar vehicle minutes later, investigators paid close attention. Likewise, descriptions of unfamiliar individuals near the campus were carefully documented and compared against one another. The objective was never to confirm a theory prematurely, but to identify patterns supported by multiple sources. The timeline remained the backbone of the investigation. Publicly available records indicate that Sarah had followed a routine consistent with many previous school mornings. Detectives reconstructed that routine minute by minute, confirming her departure from home, estimating her arrival near the school, and identifying when she was last known to be alive. Every verified event reduced the amount of uncertainty surrounding the crime. At the same time, investigators carefully identified periods where no witnesses could account for Sarah's movements. Those gaps became the focus of intense scrutiny because they represented the likely moments during which the attack occurred. Detectives also examined whether anyone had reason to know Sarah's predictable schedule. They interviewed classmates, teachers, family members, and acquaintances to determine how visible her morning routine had been. Students involved in extracurricular activities often arrive at school before the general student population, and investigators considered whether someone familiar with the campus might have recognized that pattern. They also explored the possibility that the victim had been selected randomly and that the timing reflected opportunity rather than prior knowledge. Neither explanation could be confirmed based solely on the available evidence, so both remained active investigative possibilities. While interviews continued, forensic specialists completed examinations of the evidence collected from the crime scene. Biological material, trace evidence, and other physical items underwent laboratory analysis using the scientific capabilities available in the late 1980s. Although DNA testing was beginning to emerge as a valuable investigative tool, it remained limited in both sensitivity and availability. Nevertheless, detectives made a decision that would later prove remarkably important. Rather than viewing inconclusive evidence as exhausted, they preserved it with extraordinary care. Every item was cataloged, sealed, and stored according to procedures designed to protect its integrity indefinitely. They could not know how rapidly forensic science would evolve during the following decades, but they ensured future investigators would have every opportunity to re-examine the evidence. As news coverage expanded, law enforcement agencies received an increasing number of tips from members of the public. Some callers reported suspicious vehicles seen near the school. Others identified individuals whose behavior they considered unusual following the murder. Detectives understood that public attention inevitably generates both valuable information and mistaken speculation. Each lead, therefore, underwent systematic evaluation. Officers conducted interviews, reviewed records, and compared new information against established facts. The overwhelming majority of tips failed to produce evidence connecting anyone directly to the crime, but investigators continued following every credible lead because experience had taught them that important breakthroughs sometimes begin with information that initially appears insignificant. Federal Way itself changed noticeably during those early weeks. Parents became reluctant to allow children to walk to school alone, particularly before sunrise. Students who had once considered the campus a familiar and predictable environment now viewed it through the lens of fear and uncertainty. School administrators reviewed security measures and encouraged increased vigilance among staff and students. Community meetings reflected growing frustration. Residents wanted reassurance that the killer no longer posed a threat, but detectives could offer only honesty. The investigation remained active, and the person responsible had not yet been identified. Within the investigative team, discussions increasingly focused on offender behavior. Detectives analyzed the known facts of the case without venturing into unsupported speculation. They examined how quickly the crime had occurred, the apparent selection of location, and the offender's successful departure before the campus became crowded. Such observations helped investigators understand the practical circumstances surrounding the homicide, even if they did not yet identify the individual responsible. These assessments guided future interviews and investigative priorities while remaining firmly grounded in evidence collected during the investigation. Investigators also explored whether similar crimes had occurred elsewhere in Washington or neighboring states. Comparing cases is a routine part of homicide investigations, particularly when the offender's identity remains unknown. Detectives reviewed available information from other jurisdictions, searching for similarities in victim circumstances, location, timing, or forensic evidence. Most comparisons ultimately proved unrelated, but investigators understood the importance of examining broader patterns before excluding potential connections. The emotional burden carried by Sarah's family deepened as days passed without answers. Detectives remained in contact, providing updates whenever appropriate while protecting confidential aspects of the investigation. Families often endure a unique form of uncertainty in unsolved homicide cases. Grief becomes intertwined with unanswered questions, making closure impossible. Investigators recognized this reality and continued assuring Sarah's loved ones that the case remained an active priority despite the absence of immediate breakthroughs. Behind closed doors, evidence management became an increasingly important responsibility. Detectives carefully reviewed chain of custody documentation to ensure every item collected from the scene remained fully accounted for. Proper evidence preservation is not simply administrative procedure. It safeguards the possibility of future scientific analysis and eventual courtroom presentation. Every photograph, every laboratory report, every witness interview, and every physical exhibit became part of a permanent investigative record designed to withstand scrutiny years or even decades later. As weeks became months, public attention gradually shifted toward other events. Media coverage diminished. New stories replaced old headlines. Yet for investigators assigned to Sarah's case, little had changed. Files continued growing. New interviews were conducted whenever additional information emerged. Previously examined evidence was revisited with fresh perspectives. Detectives frequently challenged one another's assumptions, recognizing that complex investigations require constant reevaluation rather than rigid adherence to initial theories. One of the defining characteristics of the investigation during this period was patience. Experienced homicide investigators understand that some cases resist immediate resolution despite extensive effort. The absence of an arrest does not necessarily indicate the absence of evidence. Instead, it often reflects the limitations of available technology, witness information, or investigative opportunities at a particular moment in time. Detectives believed they possessed important evidence recovered from the crime scene. The challenge lay in connecting that evidence to a specific individual through methods available in 1988. Throughout this period, Sarah Yarborough's name remained deeply embedded in the memory of the Federal Way community. Memorials honored her life. Friends and classmates continued remembering the teenager whose future had been stolen in a matter of minutes. For many residents, the unanswered questions surrounding her death became almost as haunting as the crime itself. Every anniversary served as another reminder that justice had not yet been achieved. Inside the evidence room, carefully sealed containers remained untouched except for authorized examinations. Investigators had no way of predicting that the biological evidence collected on that cold December morning would eventually outlive generations of forensic technology. Long before genetic genealogy transformed criminal investigations, long before national DNA databases expanded dramatically, and long before scientists developed techniques capable of analyzing increasingly small biological samples, the evidence already existed. It simply awaited the moment when science would finally become capable of revealing what it had silently preserved since December 14th, SIL 1988. For detectives, that possibility justified every hour spent documenting evidence with precision during the earliest days of the investigation. Although no arrest had been made and no suspect had yet been identified, they refused to regard the case as closed. Instead, it became an active investigation carried forward by persistence, careful record-keeping, and the belief that time does not erase truth. Sometimes it merely delays the moment when truth can finally be proven. By the beginning of 1989, the murder of Sarah Yarborough had evolved from an emergency response into one of the King County Sheriff's Office's most demanding long-term homicide investigations. The urgency that had defined the first hours after the discovery on December 14th, SIL 1988, had not disappeared. It had simply taken a different form. Detectives were no longer racing to secure a crime scene. Instead, they faced the painstaking work of evaluating every lead, preserving every piece of evidence, and ensuring that no investigative opportunity was overlooked. They understood many homicide cases are solved not through a single dramatic breakthrough, but through disciplined persistence, careful documentation, and the willingness to revisit evidence repeatedly as new information emerges. Boxes of reports began filling the investigative office. Every interview, every laboratory result, every crime scene photograph, and every tip from the public was cataloged and indexed. Experienced investigators know that information collected during the earliest days of an investigation often gains new significance months or even years later. A seemingly unimportant statement may align with evidence discovered much later. A witness who recalls only fragments at first may remember additional details after time has passed. For that reason, detectives resisted the temptation to dismiss information simply because it did not immediately produce a suspect. The investigative team continued refining the chronology of Sarah's final morning. Publicly available records established that she had followed a familiar routine, arriving at Federal Way High School before regular classes began. Detectives revisited that timeline repeatedly, comparing witness statements with school schedules and other verified information. They carefully examined exactly when students began arriving, when staff members entered the campus, and how much time elapsed between Sarah's arrival and the discovery of the crime. Narrowing that window remained essential because every confirmed minute eliminated possibilities while strengthening the overall reconstruction of events. At the same time, investigators expanded their examination of individuals who routinely spent time near the school. This did not mean those individuals were suspects. Rather, detectives followed a standard investigative principle: identify everyone who legitimately had access to the area and determine whether their movements could be independently verified. Maintenance workers, contractors, delivery personnel, nearby residents, and early arriving staff were interviewed where appropriate. Establishing ordinary activity around the campus allowed investigators to distinguish expected movements from unexplained ones. The crime scene itself continued to influence investigative decisions long after the physical area had been released. Detectives returned to the location during similar early morning hours, observing lighting conditions, visibility, traffic flow, and pedestrian activity. Conditions in December differed from those in later seasons, but investigators wanted to understand exactly what someone standing near the entrance would have been able to see. Could a passing driver have noticed unusual activity? Would someone walking nearby have heard voices? Were there locations where an individual could briefly remain unnoticed? These practical observations helped investigators evaluate witness statements within the context of the environment itself. Forensic evidence remained one of the investigation's greatest assets. Biological material recovered during the original examination had been preserved according to accepted scientific procedures. Detectives recognized that available testing methods had limitations, but they also understood that preserving evidence correctly created opportunities for future analysis. Rather than viewing laboratory work as complete once initial examinations concluded, investigators regarded the evidence as something that could potentially be revisited whenever scientific capabilities advanced. That philosophy reflected a growing awareness within law enforcement that forensic science was evolving rapidly during the late 20th century. The investigation also relied heavily on cooperation between different agencies and forensic specialists. Detectives consulted experts whenever necessary to review evidence, evaluate investigative strategies, and ensure that no reasonable avenue remained unexplored. Such collaboration is common in major homicide investigations, particularly those involving young victims and significant public concern. Although no immediate breakthrough emerged, the cumulative effect of these efforts strengthened the integrity of the investigation. Meanwhile, the Federal Way community continued living with uncertainty. Parents remained cautious about allowing children to travel alone before school. Students who had once walked across campus without concern now viewed familiar surroundings differently. Memorials honoring Sarah reflected not only grief, but also determination that her murder would not be forgotten. Community support for the investigation remained strong, and investigators encouraged anyone with information, no matter how minor it might seem, to contact law enforcement. The volume of public tips continued growing during the months following the murder. Detectives evaluated reports involving suspicious vehicles, unfamiliar individuals, and observations made near the school before or after December 14th. Most tips ultimately proved unrelated, but each required careful documentation and follow-up. Investigators understood that effective homicide work depends as much upon eliminating incorrect possibilities as confirming accurate ones. Every lead that could be conclusively ruled out narrowed the field of uncertainty. As the investigation matured, detectives also reviewed existing criminal records and compared available information with evidence collected at the scene. Such reviews formed part of a broader strategy rather than focusing exclusively on any single individual. Investigators sought to determine whether known offenders operating in the region could reasonably be connected to the crime through verified evidence. Without corroborating forensic findings or reliable witness testimony, however, speculation had little value. The investigation remained firmly grounded in facts rather than assumptions. Internally, the investigative files became increasingly organized. Timelines were updated whenever new information appeared. Evidence inventories were carefully maintained. Witness statements were cross-referenced to identify consistencies and discrepancies. Detectives frequently revisited earlier interviews with fresh perspectives, recognizing that information overlooked during the initial stages sometimes becomes significant once additional facts are established. This disciplined approach ensured that the investigation remained active even in the absence of public developments. For Sarah's family, each passing week represented another period without answers. Detectives maintained communication whenever appropriate, recognizing that transparency and compassion remain essential components of homicide investigations. While investigators could not disclose confidential details that might jeopardize the case, they continued assuring the family that the investigation had not been abandoned. Every available lead continued to receive attention. One increasingly important realization emerged during this period. The case possessed evidence that had not yet yielded its full potential. Detectives could not predict exactly how forensic science would evolve, but they understood that technological progress often transforms previously inconclusive evidence into powerful investigative tools. Consequently, meticulous preservation became just as important as active investigation. The evidence collected on December 14, 1988, was treated not merely as material for current analysis, but as an investment in future scientific opportunity. As months turned into years, media coverage naturally declined. Other cases captured public attention, and the daily urgency surrounding Sarah's murder gradually faded from newspaper front pages. Within law enforcement, however, the investigation remained open. Detectives periodically reviewed the file, reassessed evidence, and followed newly received information whenever it appeared. Cold cases rarely remain completely dormant. Instead, they continue evolving through periodic investigative activity, advances in science, and renewed examination by experienced investigators. Looking back, the decisions made during those first months proved remarkably significant. Every photograph taken at the crime scene, every witness interviewed, every report carefully written, and every biological sample preserved contributed to an investigative foundation capable of surviving decades. Although the person responsible remained unidentified, the case had been constructed with extraordinary care. Investigators had preserved the possibility that future generations of detectives, equipped with more advanced scientific tools than anyone possessed in 1988, might eventually uncover answers hidden beyond the reach of contemporary technology. That quiet confidence sustained the investigation even as time passed. Detectives understood that justice is not measured solely by speed. Some cases demand years of patience before evidence reveals its full value. Sarah Yarborough's murder would become one of those cases, a homicide investigation built upon careful forensic preservation, relentless documentation, and the unwavering belief that truth can remain hidden for decades without disappearing. Every page added to the growing case file reflected that belief, waiting for the day when science and persistence would finally converge upon the answers that had remained just beyond reach since the cold December morning when a 16-year-old student's ordinary school day ended in tragedy. As 1989 progressed, the investigation into Sarah Yarborough's murder entered a period that many detectives describe as the most difficult stage of any major homicide case. The initial flood of emergency calls had subsided. The crime scene had long since been released. Media coverage became less frequent as new events captured public attention. Yet inside the King County Sheriff's Office, the case remained active. Detectives continued examining evidence, reviewing witness statements, and pursuing every credible lead. They understood that while public attention often fades, successful homicide investigations demand persistence long after the headlines disappear. The investigative file continued to expand. Every telephone call from a member of the public was documented. Every interview generated additional reports. Detectives maintained detailed records not because they expected every lead to solve the case, but because experience had shown that information dismissed today may become significant years later. A vehicle description, a brief encounter, or an unusual observation might appear meaningless in isolation. Combined with future evidence, however, It could help establish a pattern investigators had previously been unable to recognize. One of the most valuable resources available to detectives remained the timeline of Sarah's final morning. Publicly available records established the broad sequence of events surrounding her arrival at Federal Way High School. Investigators refined that chronology repeatedly, comparing witness accounts against verified facts. They carefully evaluated when different students reached the campus, which entrances they used, and where they had been immediately before classes began. The objective was to identify the narrowest possible time frame during which the homicide occurred and determine who might have unknowingly witnessed important activity without realizing its significance. Detectives also revisited individuals interviewed during the earliest stages of the investigation. Follow-up interviews are common in major homicide cases because memories sometimes become clearer after witnesses have had time to reflect. Rather than assuming earlier statements represented complete recollections, investigators asked many witnesses to describe the morning again from the beginning. Sometimes new details emerged not because anyone had intentionally withheld information, but because seemingly ordinary observations often become meaningful only after people understand the broader context of an investigation. The evidence recovered from the crime scene remained carefully preserved in secure storage. Biological samples, trace evidence, photographs, diagrams, and laboratory reports were all maintained according to strict evidence management procedures. Detectives recognized that physical evidence possesses one remarkable advantage over human memory. It does not change with time. Witness recollections may gradually fade, but properly preserved forensic evidence remains available for future examination whenever scientific advances create new opportunities. This understanding reinforced the importance of meticulous evidence preservation throughout the investigation. During this period, forensic science itself continued evolving. Across the United States, laboratories increasingly explored the potential of DNA analysis, although its practical use remained limited compared with modern standards. Investigators following Sarah's case monitored developments with interest, but understood that existing technology could not yet answer every question presented by the evidence. Rather than viewing this limitation as defeat, detectives regarded it as a reason to preserve every possible item for future analysis. Their responsibility extended beyond the capabilities of 1989. It included protecting evidence for investigators who might revisit the case years or even decades later. The investigation also required detectives to distinguish carefully between verified information and speculation. High-profile crimes naturally generate rumors, particularly within close-knit communities. Individuals may sincerely believe they recognize a suspect based on news reports or conversations with neighbors. Others may report incidents that appear suspicious, but ultimately have no connection to the crime. Detectives approached every credible tip professionally, conducting interviews, reviewing records, and comparing information against established evidence. Most leads could be eliminated through routine investigative work, but each required attention before it could be responsibly dismissed. Within Federal Way, the emotional effects of Sarah's murder remained visible. Students who had attended the school during December 1988 continued remembering the events surrounding the discovery. Teachers and administrators carried the memory of a morning that permanently altered the atmosphere of the campus. Parents remained more cautious about early morning activities, particularly during winter months when darkness still covered much of the morning commute. Although daily routines gradually returned, the sense of security that had once defined the community had undeniably changed. Detectives periodically reviewed whether the case might connect to other investigations. This practice formed part of standard homicide procedure rather than indicating any confirmed relationship. Investigators compared available evidence with information from other jurisdictions, looking for similarities in offender behavior, victim circumstances, or forensic findings. Most comparisons produced no meaningful connection, but systematic review remained essential. Major investigations required detectives to consider every reasonable possibility before excluding it based on evidence. Behind the scenes, investigators maintained regular communication with forensic specialists regarding the evidence preserved from the crime scene. While no immediate technological breakthrough occurred, scientific methods continued improving incrementally. Detectives remained aware that advancements often arrive gradually rather than suddenly. Better laboratory procedures, improved analytical techniques, and expanding scientific knowledge collectively increased the long-term value of properly preserved evidence. The relationship between investigators and Sarah's family also remained important. Families of homicide victims often endure years of uncertainty, particularly when arrests do not occur quickly. Detectives provided updates whenever appropriate while carefully protecting confidential aspects of the investigation. Maintaining trust required honesty. Investigators could not promise immediate answers, but they consistently reaffirmed their commitment to pursuing every available lead. That commitment reflected both professional responsibility and recognition of the profound personal loss experienced by Sarah's loved ones. As the months continued passing, the case increasingly demonstrated characteristics common to investigations later classified as cold cases. This designation does not mean detectives stop working. Rather, it reflects that all immediately available investigative leads have been pursued without identifying the offender. Cases in this stage remain open, with investigators prepared to act whenever new evidence, improved technology, or additional information becomes available. Sarah Yarborough's murder gradually entered this category not because of neglect, but because every reasonable avenue available at the time had been explored without producing sufficient evidence to identify the killer. Even during quieter periods, detectives routinely returned to the evidence with fresh perspectives. They reviewed photographs taken during the original crime scene examination, studied diagrams documenting the location, and re-examined witness statements collected months earlier. Experienced investigators understand that familiarity can sometimes obscure important observations. By periodically approaching the case as though seeing it for the first time, detectives hope to recognize connections previously overlooked. One particularly significant aspect of the investigation was the quality of the original evidence collection. From the beginning, crime scene personnel had documented the location with exceptional care. Biological evidence had been preserved according to accepted forensic standards. Detailed notes accompanied every item recovered. This comprehensive documentation ensured that future investigators would not need to rely solely on written summaries. They would possess photographs, measurements, laboratory reports, and physical evidence capable of independent reevaluation. Years later, many investigators would reflect upon how crucial those early decisions had been. Had evidence been improperly collected or inadequately preserved, future scientific breakthroughs might never have benefited the case. Instead, the careful work performed on and immediately after December 14, SIL 1988, protected opportunities that no one at the time could fully anticipate. Although detectives could not yet identify the person responsible, they had successfully preserved the possibility that one day someone could. For the Federal Way community, however, such possibilities remained invisible. Residents simply knew that the murder remained unsolved. Anniversaries served as painful reminders that a young student's life had been taken and that no arrest had followed. Yet inside secure evidence storage, carefully sealed exhibits continued waiting. They contained information science had not yet learned how to fully interpret, but they also represented something far more important: proof that the investigation had not reached its true end. The answers were still there, hidden within evidence collected on that cold December morning, waiting patiently for the day when determination, technological progress, and meticulous police work would finally intersect. As the investigation moved beyond its first year, the murder of Sarah Yarborough became what investigators often describe as an active but unresolved homicide. That distinction mattered. The absence of an arrest did not mean the search for Sarah's killer had ended. Detectives continued reviewing information, following new leads when they emerged, and preserving every piece of evidence collected on December 14, SIL 1988. The pace had changed from the urgency of the first days to the persistence required by long-term investigations. Every decision was guided by a simple principle: if the case could not be solved with the tools available today, it must be preserved so it could be solved with the tools of tomorrow. The original investigative file had grown into thousands of pages. Crime scene diagrams, laboratory reports, witness interviews, photographs, evidence inventories, and follow-up memoranda documented nearly every aspect of the case. The detectives assigned to the investigation understood that meticulous record-keeping was not merely administrative work. In a homicide investigation that might span decades, accurate documentation ensured that future investigators could understand precisely what had been done, what evidence existed, which leads had been pursued, and why particular conclusions had been reached. Every page represented another safeguard against the passage of time. One of the continuing priorities involved reviewing witness statements collected during the earliest stages of the investigation. Human memory is complex. While memories often fade, individuals sometimes remember additional details after revisiting traumatic events or hearing renewed public discussion about a case. Detectives periodically contacted witnesses again, asking them to describe the morning of December 14th from the beginning rather than focusing only on specific questions. This technique occasionally revealed observations that had previously seemed too insignificant to mention. Investigators carefully evaluated every new detail, comparing it against evidence already established through forensic examination and other interviews. The timeline surrounding Sarah's arrival at Federal Way High School remained central to the investigation. Publicly available records established that she had arrived before regular classes began, consistent with her routine participation in school activities. Detectives repeatedly reconstructed those final minutes, identifying where students and staff had been located, which entrances were being used, and how activity gradually increased as the school day approached. The narrow window during which the homicide occurred reinforced investigators' belief that the offender had acted quickly before leaving the area without attracting immediate attention. At the same time, detectives continued examining information regarding vehicles observed near the campus that morning. Numerous tips had been received during the original investigation, describing automobiles seen entering, leaving, or parked near the school. Each report was evaluated according to its reliability, timing, and consistency with other evidence. Most vehicles were ultimately identified and eliminated through routine investigative work. Although no single report immediately identified the offender, detectives understood that documenting these observations preserved valuable context should additional information emerge later. Forensic evidence remained the investigation's greatest long-term asset. The biological material collected during the original crime scene examination had been stored under carefully controlled conditions. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, forensic laboratories across the United States continued refining DNA analysis techniques. While these scientific advances occurred gradually, homicide investigators closely followed developments. Cases previously considered beyond the reach of available technology occasionally benefited from improved laboratory methods capable of obtaining additional information from preserved evidence. The King County Sheriff's Office maintained communication with forensic specialists whenever significant advances occurred. Although many improvements initially applied only to newer investigations, detectives recognized that preserved evidence from older cases might eventually become suitable for re-examination. This philosophy reflected a broader transformation occurring throughout American law enforcement. Increasingly, agencies viewed unsolved homicide evidence not as static material, but as scientific resources whose value could increase over time. Sarah's family continued living with the uncertainty that accompanies every unresolved homicide. Publicly documented accounts over the years reflected their determination to see the investigation continue despite the absence of immediate answers. The detectives remained mindful that every anniversary represented another reminder of the questions left unanswered since December 1988. While investigators could not promise rapid progress, they consistently maintained that the case remained open and that preserved evidence continued to offer hope for the future. Within the Federal Way community, memories of the murder remained vivid. Students who had attended the school during 1988 graduated and moved on with their lives, but many continued remembering the morning when routine suddenly gave way to tragedy. Teachers, administrators, and law enforcement officers carried similar memories. Although daily life gradually returned to normal, the case became part of the community's collective history, a reminder of both profound loss and the determination to continue seeking justice. Investigators also benefited from improvements in information management. As technology evolved during the following years, agencies increasingly converted older investigative records into formats that allowed detectives to search, organize, and compare information more efficiently. While this administrative work attracted little public attention, it significantly enhanced investigators' ability to review decades of evidence without relying solely on paper files. Cross-referencing witness names, vehicle descriptions, timelines, and forensic reports became increasingly practical, enabling fresh examinations of long-standing investigations. Throughout this period, detectives remained disciplined in distinguishing verified evidence from speculation. High-profile, unsolved cases often generate rumors, theories, and unsupported claims. Investigators repeatedly emphasized the importance of relying upon documented facts rather than assumptions. This commitment protected the integrity of the investigation while ensuring that future prosecutorial decisions, if the case were eventually solved, rested upon reliable evidence rather than public conjecture. The preserved biological evidence continued to represent an unresolved scientific question. Detectives understood that DNA technology was advancing, but they also recognized that laboratories required sufficient sensitivity, validated procedures, and reliable comparison methods before meaningful conclusions could be drawn. Rather than rushing incomplete testing, investigators waited for methods capable of producing results that would withstand scientific and legal scrutiny. Patience became as important as persistence. By the mid-1990s, DNA profiling had become increasingly influential in criminal investigations nationwide. Law enforcement agencies successfully used the technology to identify offenders, exclude innocent individuals, and connect crimes committed across different jurisdictions. Detectives responsible for Sarah Yarborough's case closely monitored these developments, evaluating whether preserved evidence might benefit from emerging techniques. Although immediate answers remained elusive, each scientific advance increased optimism that evidence collected years earlier still possessed untapped investigative value. Internally, the case never disappeared from investigative attention. Supervisors ensured that evidence remained properly preserved, documentation remained complete, and opportunities for renewed examination were not overlooked. Experienced homicide investigators understand that successful long-term cases often depend upon continuity. Even when personnel change through retirement or reassignment, comprehensive records allow new detectives to understand the investigation without losing the knowledge accumulated by their predecessors. The significance of the original crime scene investigation became increasingly apparent as years passed. Every photograph, every measurement, every laboratory submission, and every carefully sealed evidence package reflected the professionalism of investigators who had understood the importance of preserving opportunities beyond the limits of contemporary science. Without that meticulous work on December 14, SIL 1988, later forensic advances might have offered little benefit instead, because the evidence had been collected and maintained with exceptional care. The possibility of future scientific analysis remained alive. For the public, the investigation appeared quiet. There were no dramatic arrests, no televised searches, and no daily press conferences. Yet beneath that apparent silence, the case continued evolving. Detectives remained committed. Evidence remained secure. Science continued advancing. The questions first asked on that winter morning, who attacked Sarah Yarborough, why it happened, and whether justice could ever be achieved, had not been answered, but neither had they been abandoned. The investigation endured because the evidence endured, waiting through the years for the moment when technology would finally become capable of revealing what detectives had believed all along, that the truth had never disappeared. It had simply remained hidden, preserved within the evidence since the morning Sarah arrived at school on December 14, SIL 1988. As the months following Sarah Yarborough's murder turned into years, the investigation entered a phase that every homicide detective hopes to avoid but many eventually face. The immediate urgency of December 1988 had faded from newspaper headlines, yet the unanswered questions remained exactly as they had on the morning Sarah was found outside Federal Way High School. Detectives had processed the crime scene, interviewed witnesses, analyzed physical evidence using the best technology available at the time, and followed every credible lead they could identify. Despite those efforts, no suspect had been charged. The case gradually came to be regarded as a cold case not because it had been forgotten, but because every reasonable investigative avenue then available had been pursued without producing enough evidence to identify and prosecute the person responsible. Within the King County Sheriff's Office, however, the term cold case never meant inactive. The investigation remained open. Detectives understood that an unsolved homicide differs fundamentally from many other criminal investigations. There is no statute of limitations for murder in Washington state. As long as evidence exists and investigators continue searching for answers, the possibility of justice remains alive. That philosophy shaped every decision made after the initial investigation slowed. Rather than closing files and moving on, detectives preserved every report, every photograph, every interview transcript, and every piece of physical evidence with the expectation that future investigators might someday return to the case armed with new knowledge and more advanced scientific tools. The passage of time presented its own challenges. Witnesses moved away from Federal Way. Students who had attended the high school in 1988 graduated, started careers, and built families of their own. Teachers retired. Detectives originally assigned to the investigation accepted new assignments or eventually left the department after long careers in law enforcement. Yet the case itself remained. Each transition required careful transfer of knowledge from one investigator to another. Comprehensive documentation became essential. Every investigative decision, every eliminated lead, and every remaining question had to be recorded clearly enough that someone joining the investigation years later could understand precisely where the case stood without repeating work already completed. For Sarah Yarborough's family, the years carried a different burden. Public records and interviews over the decades reflected the enduring pain experienced by loved ones waiting for answers that never seemed to come. Birthdays, holidays, graduations, and family milestones all unfolded in the shadow of an unresolved homicide. Every anniversary of December 14th served as another reminder that Sarah's life had ended at 16, while the individual responsible remained unidentified. Families living through long-term homicide investigations often describe a unique form of grief, one complicated by uncertainty. Questions remain unanswered. Justice remains incomplete. Hope persists even as years pass without visible progress. Detectives periodically reopened the investigative files, particularly whenever new information arrived or advances in forensic science suggested fresh opportunities. They reviewed witness statements collected years earlier, comparing them with evidence preserved from the original crime scene. Sometimes investigators approached the case from entirely new perspectives, asking whether assumptions made during the early stages still held true or whether overlooked details might take on greater significance in light of later developments. Such reviews are common in unresolved homicide investigations because experience has repeatedly demonstrated that fresh eyes sometimes recognize patterns invisible to those immersed in the original inquiry. Meanwhile, forensic science continued advancing throughout the 1990s. DNA profiling became increasingly reliable and more widely accepted within the American criminal justice system. Cases that once depended almost entirely upon eyewitness testimony or confessions now increasingly incorporated genetic evidence capable of identifying offenders or excluding innocent individuals with remarkable precision. Detectives responsible for Sarah's investigation closely followed these developments. They understood that biological evidence collected in 1988 might eventually reveal information impossible to obtain during the original investigation. The careful preservation of that evidence, therefore, became increasingly significant with every scientific breakthrough. Despite these advances, practical limitations remained. Early DNA testing often required larger or higher quality biological samples than later technologies. Laboratories prioritized cases based on available resources, and scientific methods continued evolving year after year. The detectives could not simply resubmit evidence each time a minor improvement occurred. Instead, they evaluated whether meaningful advances justified additional testing while ensuring that limited evidence would not be unnecessarily consumed by procedures unlikely to produce useful results. This careful balance between preserving evidence and pursuing scientific opportunity required close collaboration between investigators and forensic specialists. Public attention surrounding the case naturally diminished over time. New crimes, new investigations, and new headlines replaced the coverage that had dominated local news in late 1988. Yet Sarah Yarborough's name continued appearing periodically, particularly around anniversaries of her death. Local newspapers and television stations occasionally revisited the case, reminding viewers that the investigation remained unsolved and encouraging anyone with information to contact law enforcement. These renewed appeals sometimes generated additional tips, though most ultimately repeated information already known or proved impossible to verify after so many years. Within the Federal Way community, memories of the murder endured. Former students remembered the shock of arriving at school that December morning. Teachers recalled the difficult conversations held with frightened teenagers. Parents remembered altering family routines out of concern for their children's safety. Although the city itself continued growing and changing, the murder remained part of its collective history. For many residents, the case represented not only the tragic loss of a young life, but also the enduring determination to continue seeking justice regardless of how much time had passed. Investigators also recognized another challenge common to aging homicide cases. Memory inevitably changes with time. Witnesses may sincerely believe they remember events clearly, yet recollections can gradually become influenced by media coverage, conversations with others, or the simple passage of years. Consequently, detectives increasingly relied upon contemporaneous records created during the original investigation. Statements recorded in December 1988 often carried particular evidentiary value because they reflected memories documented immediately after the crime, before later influences could affect recollection. Preserving those original interviews proved just as important as preserving physical evidence. Technological advances extended beyond forensic laboratories. Law enforcement agencies gradually adopted improved computer systems capable of organizing investigative information more efficiently. Older paper records were indexed, digitized where appropriate, and made more accessible for future review. Detectives could compare names, addresses, vehicle descriptions, and other investigative details more rapidly than had been possible during the original investigation. While such administrative improvements rarely attract public attention, they substantially enhance the ability of investigators to revisit complex cases spanning many years. The emergence of national DNA databases during the 1990s and early 2000s also transformed criminal investigations across the United States. These systems allowed qualifying DNA profiles from crime scenes to be compared against profiles obtained from convicted offenders and, later, other qualifying individuals under applicable laws. Investigators responsible for Sarah's case monitored these developments carefully. Whenever appropriate and scientifically feasible, preserved evidence could potentially benefit from expanding forensic capabilities. Although no immediate match emerged during those early years, the infrastructure supporting future investigations continued strengthening. Inside the evidence room, the biological material recovered on December 14, SIL 1988, remained secured under controlled conditions. Detectives understood that this evidence represented more than physical exhibits stored on shelves. It embodied the possibility that science might someday answer questions investigators had been asking since the morning Sarah was killed. Every improvement in DNA analysis renewed cautious optimism. Every successful identification in another cold case demonstrated that time alone does not destroy the evidentiary value of properly preserved forensic material. The investigation's continued existence reflected an important truth about homicide work. Cases do not become unsolved because investigators lose interest. Rather, they become unsolved because available evidence has not yet revealed the identity of the offender. In Sarah Yarborough's case, detectives remained convinced that the answer existed within the evidence collected during the original investigation. What remained uncertain was when technology would become capable of uncovering it. As the years stretched into decades, patience became one of the investigation's defining characteristics. Detectives came and went, scientific methods evolved, and Federal Way itself continued changing. Yet the commitment to solving Sarah's murder endured. The case file remained active, evidence remained preserved, and investigators continued believing that the truth had not disappeared with time. It had merely become concealed behind the limitations of contemporary science. Unknown to nearly everyone outside the investigation, that hidden truth was slowly moving closer to discovery as forensic technology advanced year after year, bringing investigators incrementally nearer to identifying the person who had escaped justice since that cold December morning in 1988. As the investigation entered the 1990s, detectives increasingly came to believe that the most valuable witness in the Sarah Yarborough case was no longer a person. It was the evidence itself. Memories fade, eyewitnesses relocate, newspaper clippings turn yellow with age, and investigators retire. But physical evidence, when collected correctly and preserved with care, remains unchanged. Hidden inside sealed evidence envelopes and carefully documented laboratory submissions was biological material recovered on the morning of December 14, SIL 1988. At the time, no one could know that those samples would one day become the key to solving one of Washington State's longest-running unsolved murders. Yet because investigators resisted the temptation to treat the evidence as exhausted, they unknowingly preserved the opportunity for justice decades into the future. The decisions made during the first hours of the investigation proved remarkably important. Crime scene technicians followed established forensic procedures, photographing every significant area before collecting evidence. Biological samples were packaged individually, labeled, sealed, and entered into an evidence management system designed to maintain an unbroken chain of custody. Detectives understood that preserving the integrity of evidence was essential not only for immediate laboratory analysis, but also for any future prosecution. Every person who handled an exhibit documented the transfer. Every movement was recorded. Such meticulous documentation ensured that years later, investigators could demonstrate exactly where each item had been stored and who had accessed it. At the time of Sarah's murder, DNA profiling was still developing into a practical investigative tool. The scientific community had already demonstrated that DNA could distinguish one individual from another with extraordinary accuracy, but routine criminal casework remained limited by available technology. Laboratories required larger biological samples than later generations of forensic scientists would need, and processing often took considerably longer than modern standards. The detectives recognized Dana's potential, yet they also understood its limitations. Consequently, they approached the biological evidence with exceptional caution. Rather than consuming every available sample during early testing, investigators preserved material for future examination, anticipating that scientific methods would continue improving. This philosophy reflected a growing change within forensic investigations across the United States. Detectives increasingly appreciated that evidence should not be viewed only through the capabilities of current technology. Scientific progress had already transformed fingerprint analysis, blood typing, and microscopic examinations. DNA promised to advance even further. By preserving biological evidence carefully, investigators effectively protected opportunities that had not yet become scientifically possible. In Sarah Yarborough's case, this foresight would eventually become one of the investigation's defining strengths. The biological material recovered from the crime scene remained secured under controlled storage conditions. Evidence custodians monitored environmental factors designed to protect sensitive forensic exhibits from contamination or degradation. Procedures governing access became increasingly strict. Only authorized personnel could retrieve evidence for examination, and every inspection required complete documentation. Although these administrative safeguards rarely attracted public attention, they played an essential role in maintaining the evidentiary value of material collected in 1988. Meanwhile, forensic science advanced steadily throughout the 1990s. Laboratories developed increasingly sensitive methods capable of obtaining DNA profiles from smaller and more degraded samples than had previously been possible. Polymerase chain reaction, commonly known as CCR, dramatically expanded the ability of scientists to analyze minute quantities of genetic material. Detectives responsible for unresolved homicide cases followed these developments closely, recognizing that evidence once considered unsuitable for comprehensive analysis might eventually produce meaningful results. Despite these advances, investigators exercised patience. Every round of forensic testing consumes at least a portion of the available biological material. Detectives therefore worked closely with laboratory scientists before authorizing additional examinations. The question was never simply whether new technology existed. Instead, investigators considered whether available methods had improved enough to justify using irreplaceable evidence. This careful balance between scientific opportunity and evidence preservation required disciplined decision-making. The goal remained not merely to obtain results, but to maximize the likelihood that testing would generate reliable, court-admissible evidence. The emergence of computerized DNA databases represented another major development. Across the United States, qualifying DNA profiles obtained from convicted offenders and crime scenes increasingly became searchable through expanding national systems. Detectives responsible for Sarah's case monitored these developments carefully. Whenever scientifically appropriate, preserved evidence could potentially be compared against expanding databases containing profiles from individuals convicted of qualifying offenses. Although no immediate breakthrough occurred during the early years of database expansion, investigators recognized that every additional profile entered into the system increased the possibility of a future match. Inside the King County Sheriff's Office, the evidence associated with Sarah Yarborough's murder acquired almost symbolic significance. Detectives understood that while witness memories inevitably changed over time, DNA remained constant. Unlike recollections influenced by years of conversations, media reports, or natural memory loss, genetic material preserved exactly the same biological information it contained on the morning it was collected. This scientific permanence provided investigators with confidence that the passage of time alone would not destroy their ability to identify the offender if technological capabilities continued improving. Periodic reviews of the evidence became routine. Investigators consulted forensic specialists regarding newly available testing methods, asking whether advances justified re-examining preserved samples. These discussions reflected collaboration rather than urgency. Detectives understood that forensic science develops incrementally. Each improvement builds upon previous discoveries, gradually expanding the range of questions laboratories can answer. Rather than expecting a single revolutionary breakthrough, investigators recognized that meaningful progress often occurs through many successive refinements. Throughout these years, Sarah's family continued waiting. Publicly available accounts describe their determination to keep the investigation alive despite the absence of visible progress. The detectives remained committed to explaining developments whenever appropriate, emphasizing that evidence preservation represented an active investment in the future rather than passive storage. While there might be few public announcements, important work continued behind laboratory doors and within evidence, facilities where carefully preserved exhibits awaited scientific advances. Nationally, other cold cases gradually demonstrated the remarkable potential of DNA evidence. Investigations once considered permanently unsolved began reaching unexpected resolutions after improved forensic analysis identified offenders or excluded previously suspected individuals. Each successful case reinforced the importance of preserving biological evidence. Detectives working Sarah Yarborough's investigation watched these developments with cautious optimism. Every solved cold case confirmed that time alone does not diminish the value of properly preserved forensic material. Evidence management practices also continued improving. Older paper documentation was supplemented by computerized inventory systems capable of tracking evidence more efficiently. Detailed records ensured investigators could locate exhibits quickly whenever additional testing became appropriate. Maintaining these systems required continuous attention because long-term homicide investigations often span multiple generations of detectives, supervisors, and forensic personnel. Accurate documentation guaranteed continuity regardless of personnel changes. Behind every procedural safeguard remained a simple objective: preserve the opportunity for justice. Detectives could not predict precisely when science would become capable of extracting all available information from the evidence recovered in December 1988. They could, however, ensure that nothing under their control prevented future investigators from trying. Every sealed package, every chain of custody record, every climate-controlled storage facility, and every carefully documented laboratory submission reflected that commitment. Looking back years later, investigators would recognize that preserving the biological evidence had been one of the most consequential decisions made during the original investigation. The samples remained viable because crime scene personnel had collected them properly. They retained evidentiary value because custodians had protected them meticulously. They remained available for increasingly sophisticated analysis because detectives had resisted exhausting them through premature testing. What initially appeared to be routine forensic procedure ultimately became the foundation upon which future scientific breakthroughs would build. As another anniversary of Sarah Yarborough's murder passed, the investigation still lacked the answer everyone sought. Yet inside, secure evidence storage, preserved biological material quietly retained information untouched by time. Detectives increasingly understood that solving the case might no longer depend upon discovering a forgotten witness or obtaining an unexpected confession. Instead, the path forward appeared more likely to emerge from the silent evidence collected on that winter morning, evidence patiently waiting through years of scientific progress until technology finally became capable of revealing the identity hidden within it. As the years passed and forensic science continued advancing, the murder of Sarah Yarborough never disappeared from the files of the King County Sheriff's Office. Although the investigation had long been classified as a cold case, detectives understood that, quote, cold referred only to the pace of new leads, not to the determination of law enforcement. The evidence collected on December 14th, SIL 1988, remained preserved. The case file remained active, and every significant development in forensic technology prompted investigators to ask the same question. Could today's science reveal what yesterday's methods could not? By the late 2010s, that question became more urgent than ever. Across the United States, decades-old murders were being solved through techniques that had not existed when Sarah was killed. Detectives recognized that the time had come to return to one of Washington's most haunting unsolved homicides with a completely new investigative strategy. Reopening a cold case is not as simple as taking an old file from a shelf. It is a systematic process requiring investigators to rebuild the case from the beginning while benefiting from decades of accumulated knowledge. The detectives assigned to Sarah Yarborough's investigation began by reviewing every report generated since the morning her body was discovered outside Federal Way High School. Crime scene photographs were examined again. Witness statements recorded in 1988 were reread carefully. Laboratory reports produced over the years were compared with modern forensic standards. Every decision made by the original investigative team was evaluated, not because detectives believed mistakes had been made, but because new technology often changes the significance of evidence that once appeared inconclusive. The original investigators had left behind an extraordinary foundation. Their careful documentation, meticulous evidence collection, and disciplined preservation practices meant that decades later, the case remained scientifically viable. Biological evidence recovered at the crime scene had been protected according to proper forensic procedures. Chain of custody records remained complete. Photographs, diagrams, and investigative notes allowed modern detectives to understand precisely how evidence had been collected and processed. Without that level of professionalism in 1988, reopening the case years later would have been far more difficult. One of the first priorities involved determining whether the preserved biological evidence could undergo additional forensic analysis using modern laboratory techniques. DNA technology had advanced dramatically since the original investigation. Laboratories could now obtain genetic profiles from samples once considered too small or too degraded for meaningful examination. The detectives consulted forensic scientists to evaluate the remaining evidence and determine which items offered the greatest potential for further testing. This collaboration reflected the increasingly close relationship between homicide investigators and forensic specialists in modern cold case investigations. At the same time, investigators reviewed every lead pursued during the original inquiry. Individuals who had been interviewed decades earlier were identified within the case files, and detectives examined whether any new information had emerged regarding those interviews. Some witnesses had relocated, others had passed away. Nevertheless, the original statements remained invaluable because they captured memories recorded immediately after the crime, before years of discussion or media coverage could influence recollections. The detectives treated these contemporaneous accounts as essential historical documents, comparing them carefully against new forensic findings as the investigation progressed. The reopening of the case also benefited from advances in digital information systems. Records that once occupied filing cabinets could now be searched electronically. Names, vehicle descriptions, addresses, telephone numbers, and investigative notes became easier to cross-reference than ever before. Detectives used these tools not to replace traditional investigative work, but to enhance it. Patterns that might have taken weeks to identify using paper records could now emerge much more quickly through systematic digital review. Nationally, the success of other cold case investigations inspired renewed optimism. Across the country, long unsolved murders had been resolved through advances in forensic DNA analysis and investigative genealogy. Cases that had remained dormant for 30 or 40 years suddenly produced arrests because preserved biological evidence could now be linked to individuals using methods unimaginable in 1988. Detectives responsible for Sarah Yarborough's case followed these developments closely. They understood that every successful cold case demonstrated not only the power of modern science, but also the importance of preserving evidence with extraordinary care during the original investigation. As forensic laboratories completed new examinations of the preserved biological evidence, investigators evaluated the results alongside everything already known about the case. Rather than treating scientific findings in isolation, detectives integrated them into the broader investigative picture. The crime scene evidence, witness timelines, original interviews, and forensic results all became interconnected pieces of a single investigative framework. Modern homicide investigations increasingly rely upon this combination of traditional detective work and advanced scientific analysis. Throughout the renewed investigation, detectives remained careful not to allow technological excitement to replace investigative discipline. Every new lead required independent verification. Every scientific conclusion had to satisfy rigorous legal standards. Investigators understood that solving a homicide involves more than identifying a possible suspect. It requires assembling evidence capable of proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt in court. Consequently, detectives proceeded methodically, ensuring that every investigative step strengthened the integrity of the case. For Sarah's family, the reopening of the investigation represented something they had hoped for during many difficult years. Publicly available accounts indicate that law enforcement maintained communication with the family as appropriate, recognizing both the emotional significance of renewed investigative activity and the importance of protecting confidential aspects of the case. Although detectives could not promise immediate answers, the fact that modern science offered new opportunities provided cautious optimism after decades of uncertainty. Within the King County Sheriff's Office, the case became an example of why unresolved homicides should never be abandoned simply because time has passed. Detectives understood that every year brings scientific advances, improved investigative techniques, and new opportunities unavailable to previous generations. The passage of time had not weakened the biological evidence recovered in 1988 because it had been preserved correctly instead. Time had strengthened the investigation by allowing forensic science to catch up with evidence patiently waiting for analysis. Investigators also recognized the importance of collaboration. Cold case investigations frequently involve partnerships among homicide detectives, forensic scientists, prosecutors, evidence custodians, and specialists in emerging investigative methods. Sarah Yarborough's case reflected that multidisciplinary approach. Every participant contributed expertise, ensuring that decisions regarding laboratory testing, evidence interpretation, and investigative strategy reflected both scientific accuracy and legal reliability. As detectives continued assembling new information, the contrast between 1988 and the modern investigation became increasingly striking. The original investigators had relied primarily upon witness interviews, physical evidence, and the limited forensic tools then available. Decades later, detectives possessed vastly more sophisticated scientific capabilities while still depending upon the professionalism of those original investigators who had preserved the evidence. The two investigations were separated by time, but united by a common commitment to uncovering the truth. The reopening of the case also sent a broader message to the community. Although many residents had long feared that Sarah Yarborough's murder might never be solved, renewed investigative activity demonstrated that law enforcement had not forgotten. Advances in forensic science had transformed possibilities once considered unattainable into realistic investigative opportunities. Detectives understood that solving the case would honor not only Sarah's memory, but also the persistence of everyone who had worked the investigation over 3 decades. As the renewed forensic examinations continued producing increasingly valuable information, investigators sensed that the case was approaching a turning point unlike anything experienced since December 1988. Years of careful evidence preservation, relentless documentation, and scientific progress were beginning to converge. The biological evidence that had remained silent for decades was now yielding information capable of directing detectives toward answers that had eluded generations of investigators. After more than 30 years, the investigation no longer depended solely upon preserving hope. For the first time since Sarah Yarborough was murdered outside her high school, detectives possessed compelling reasons to believe that the identity of the killer might finally be within reach. The investigation into the murder of Sarah Yarborough reached a fundamentally new stage when detectives began using investigative methods that did not exist when the crime occurred in December 1988. For decades, the biological evidence recovered at the scene had been carefully preserved. Earlier rounds of DNA testing had established that the material belonged to the unknown offender, but identifying that individual remained impossible because no direct match was found in the law enforcement databases available at the time. Investigators had reached the limits of traditional forensic comparison. The evidence clearly identified one person, yet that person remained unnamed. By the late 2010s, however, advances in forensic genetics were transforming cold case investigations throughout the United States. One of the most significant developments was the emergence of investigative genetic genealogy, a technique that differs from conventional DNA database searches. Rather than looking for an exact match to a known offender in a criminal database, investigators can, where legally permitted, compare an unknown DNA profile against profiles voluntarily made available for genealogical research. Instead of identifying the suspect directly, investigators may identify distant biological relatives. Professional genealogists then use historical records, family trees, census information, birth records, marriage records, military records, newspaper archives, and other public documents to reconstruct family relationships and gradually narrow the field of possible individuals. For detectives assigned to Sarah Yarborough's case, this represented an entirely new investigative opportunity. The preserved DNA profile from the crime scene remained scientifically suitable for further analysis because it had been collected and stored with exceptional care decades earlier. Investigators worked with forensic specialists to prepare the DNA for genealogy-based analysis. This process required additional laboratory work to generate the type of genetic profile suitable for genealogical comparison. The scientific standards governing this work were rigorous because any future prosecution would depend upon the reliability and integrity of every analytical step. Once the genealogy process began, investigators did not receive the name of a suspect. Instead, they received information pointing toward individuals who shared portions of their DNA with the unknown offender. These relatives were often distant people who had never met the individual detectives were ultimately trying to identify. From that point forward, the investigation became a combination of forensic science and traditional detective work. Genealogists reconstructed extensive family trees spanning multiple generations, carefully documenting marriages, children, grandchildren, relocations, and other family connections. Detectives then compared these family trees with the known facts of the Sarah Yarborough investigation. They asked practical questions rather than relying on speculation. Which family members had lived in Washington state during the late 1980s? Who was old enough to have committed the crime? Who could reasonably have been in the Federal Way area in December 1988? Who could be excluded based on age, location, military service, incarceration, or documented residence elsewhere? One by one, entire branches of the family tree were eliminated through verified evidence. Unlike fictional portrayals of investigations, this process required patience rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Weeks of genealogical research often produced only small advances. Every conclusion required documentary support. Every relationship had to be confirmed through reliable public records. Detectives understood that mistakes in genealogy could send an investigation in the wrong direction, so every connection underwent independent verification before investigators proceeded further. As the family tree became increasingly refined, attention gradually focused on a much smaller group of individuals whose age, geographic history, and family relationships were consistent with the available evidence. The detectives continued comparing historical records with information collected during the original investigation. Nothing was accepted solely because genealogy suggested a possibility. Scientific evidence guided the investigation, but traditional police work remained essential. Eventually, investigators identified a person whose background warranted closer examination. At this stage, however, genealogy alone did not establish guilt. Under the law, it served only as an investigative lead. The detectives still needed direct forensic confirmation linking that individual to the biological evidence recovered in 1988. The genealogy research had narrowed the search dramatically, but the investigation was not complete. To obtain that confirmation, investigators followed established legal procedures. As in many cold cases solved through investigative genealogy, detectives sought to obtain a DNA sample associated with the individual identified through the family tree analysis. Once a lawfully obtained comparison sample became available, forensic scientists conducted a direct DNA comparison against the biological evidence preserved from the original crime scene. Unlike genealogy, which identifies possible relatives, this comparison answered a straightforward scientific question. Did the DNA from the newly obtained sample match the DNA recovered during the investigation into Sarah Yarborough's murder? The laboratory results provided investigators with the answer they had been seeking for more than 3 decades. The comparison established that the biological evidence collected on December 14, SIL 1988, matched the identified individual. The decades-long mystery surrounding the unknown DNA profile had finally been resolved through a combination of careful evidence preservation, advances in forensic genetics, meticulous genealogical research, and traditional investigative work. For the detectives who had inherited the case from earlier generations of investigators, the moment represented the culmination of years of persistence built upon work that had begun in the freezing darkness outside Federal Way High School in 1988. The original investigators had no access to investigative genealogy. They could not have imagined the scientific techniques that would eventually become available. Yet because they had preserved the biological evidence with exceptional care, future investigators possessed the opportunity to apply technologies that had not yet been invented. The breakthrough also demonstrated an important lesson repeated across many modern cold case investigations. Scientific progress alone does not solve crimes. Success depends equally upon meticulous crime scene work, accurate evidence preservation, complete documentation, experienced forensic scientists, skilled genealogists, and detectives willing to revisit decades-old investigations with fresh perspectives. In Sarah Yarborough's case, every stage of the investigation from the first photographs taken in December 1988 to the final DNA comparison decades later formed an unbroken chain leading investigators toward the truth that had remained hidden for more than 30 years. More than 35 years after Sarah Yarborough was murdered outside Federal Way High School, the investigation reached the moment that generations of detectives had worked toward. The breakthrough did not come from a confession, a newly discovered eyewitness, or forgotten physical evidence. It came from the convergence of meticulously preserved biological evidence, modern DNA analysis, investigative genetic genealogy, and traditional police work. Together, these investigative tools transformed a decades-old unidentified DNA profile into the identity of a living person. After forensic genealogical research narrowed the pool of potential individuals, detectives focused their investigation on Gary Charles Hartman, a Washington man whose family history, age, and location were consistent with the evidence developed during the investigation. At that stage, however, investigators were careful to treat Hartman as an investigative lead rather than as a confirmed suspect. Genetic genealogy is an investigative method, not evidence of guilt by itself. Law enforcement still needed direct forensic confirmation that the DNA recovered from the 1988 crime scene belonged to Hartman. Investigators therefore undertook additional investigative steps consistent with established legal procedures. Their objective was straightforward: obtain a DNA sample attributable to Hartman that could be compared directly with the biological evidence preserved since December 1988. Once an appropriate reference sample was lawfully obtained, forensic scientists conducted a direct DNA comparison using modern laboratory techniques. The results were decisive. According to court records and public statements by the King County Sheriff's Office, the DNA profile obtained from Hartman matched the biological evidence recovered during the investigation into Sarah Yarborough's murder. For detectives, the comparison represented the first direct scientific identification of the person whose DNA had remained unknown for more than 3 decades. The confirmation marked a turning point in the investigation, but detectives understood that their work was not finished. A DNA match, while extraordinarily powerful evidence, forms only one component of a criminal investigation. Investigators carefully reviewed the complete case file, ensuring that the evidence supporting prosecution extended beyond the laboratory findings. Original witness statements, crime scene documentation, forensic reports, chain of custody records, and the chronology developed over decades were all revisited. Prosecutors